This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I never thought I'd miss barking. Anyone who's ever lived with a German Shepherd would think I'm crazy for saying that. But Max's bark wasn't just noise. It was my security system, my peace of mind, my assurance that everything was okay. I've been a dog groomer in Buffalo for 11 years now. I work with all kinds of dogs every day at my small shop, but Max has always been special. I got him as a puppy 7 years ago, and from day one, he took his job as my protector seriously. Too seriously sometimes. Anyone who has ever walked past my house knows Max. The mailman knows Max. The UPS guy definitely knows Max. He would bark at literally everything. Squirrels, other dogs, a leaf blowing in the wind, you name it. His favorite spot was along the back fence, where he'd run back and forth like he was patrolling the border of some small nation. His deep, powerful bark would echo through the neighborhood, and while I occasionally got complaints, I secretly loved the security it provided. Living alone in a house at the edge of the neighborhood, Max's vigilance made me feel safe. It was the second week of December when I first noticed something was off. Buffalo winters are harsh, and we'd already had our first major snowfall. I'd let Max out for his nightly patrol around 10 p.m. like always, bundled up in my winter coat to watch him from the back porch. Usually he'd tear around the yard, barking at shadows, keeping the neighborhood on notice that he was on duty. But that night, he just didn't bark. He trotted along the fence line, stopped at his usual corner spot, and just stood there. I figured maybe he was getting tired. He was 7 now. Not exactly a puppy anymore. After a few minutes of this bizarre silent sentinel act, he simply turned and walked back to the porch, looking up at me with those amber eyes like nothing was unusual. "Getting lazy in your old age, buddy?" I laughed, ruffling his thick fur before we went inside. The next night was the same thing, and the night after that. Within a week, I realized I hadn't heard Max bark once, not even when the mailman came, which was practically a religious experience for him previously. Instead of running to the front window to announce the mail's arrival, he just lifted his head from his bed, looked toward the door, and went back to sleep. At first, I thought maybe he was sick. I checked his throat, his gums, felt for a fever. Nothing seemed obviously wrong. His appetite was normal. He still wanted his walks, and he was affectionate as ever. I even called the vet to describe his behavior, and she suggested it might just be a sign of maturity. "Some dogs mellow as they age," she said. "Count yourself lucky." But I couldn't shake this feeling that something wasn't right. Max wasn't just not barking. His entire nighttime routine had changed. Instead of patrolling the yard, he would walk directly to that same spot by the back fence, stand completely still for anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, just staring at something I couldn't see, and then come back inside without making a sound. After about 2 weeks of this, my unease had grown into genuine concern. It was mid-December now, and the nights were long and dark. One evening, after Max returned from another silent vigil, I noticed something else strange. He smelled different. Not dirty or bad, just different, almost medicinal. That's when I remembered the security cameras. I'd installed a basic system last year. Nothing fancy, just motion-activated cameras at the front door, back door, and one overlooking the yard. I hadn't checked the footage in months, since nothing ever happened around here. Our neighborhood isn't exactly a hotbed of crime. After Max fell asleep that night, I grabbed my laptop and started reviewing footage from the past couple weeks. The first few nights showed nothing unusual, just Max running around the yard, barking his head off as expected. Then I found it. The first night he'd gone silent. The timestamp showed 11:53 p.m., about 20 minutes after I'd let Max out. The camera caught movement near the back fence, a figure, definitely human, approaching from the other side. My stomach dropped. The person crouched down when Max ran toward the fence, but instead of the barking frenzy I would have expected, the footage showed Max slowing down, his tail starting to wag cautiously. The stranger reached through the slats in the wooden fence, offering something in their hand. Max approached, sniffed whatever it was, and then ate it. The person reached through again, petting Max's head before leaving. The entire interaction lasted maybe 2 minutes. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely navigate to the next night's footage. Same thing, different time, around 12:15 a.m., but the same routine. The person would come to the fence, Max would approach without barking, take something from their hand, and the stranger would pet him before leaving. I felt sick. Someone had been coming into my yard at night and, what? Feeding my dog something? Training him not to bark? Why? I immediately called Max over, checking him again for any signs of illness or injury. He seemed fine, but I was no longer willing to take chances. The next morning, I took him to the vet for a full checkup and mentioned what I'd seen on the security footage. The vet was as disturbed as I was. She ran blood tests and found traces of a mild sedative in his system. Nothing that would knock him out completely, but enough to keep him calm and quiet. Enough to stop him from barking. "Someone's been drugging him," she said, her face grim. "Not with enough to harm him permanently, but this is definitely concerning. I'd contact the police." I filed a report that same day. The officer who took my statement seemed to take it seriously, but warned me that without clear identification of the person in the video, there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrols in my area. That night, I kept Max inside. I couldn't risk letting him out where someone could reach him. He whined at the door around his usual time, confused about the change in routine, but I distracted him with a new chew toy. Meanwhile, I set up my laptop to monitor the live feed from the security cameras. Nothing happened until 11:47 p.m. The motion sensor activated, and I watched in real time as a figure approached my back fence from the adjacent property beyond. It was the exact same spot where Max always stood during his silent vigils. The person was carrying something, a small bag that looked like it might be from a pharmacy. My heart pounding in my chest, I hit the button to activate the floodlights I'd installed years ago but rarely used. The yard lit up like daylight, and I got my first clear look at the intruder. It was a man, probably in his 60s, with thin, wiry gray hair and a gaunt face. He wore a dark coat and gloves despite the cold not being that severe that night. What struck me most was how ordinary he looked, like someone's grandfather or a retired teacher. Not the kind of person you'd expect to be creeping around your yard at midnight. I ran to the back door and shouted through the glass, "I can see you! The police are on their way!" It wasn't true. I hadn't called them yet. But it was the first thing that came to mind. The man didn't run. He didn't even seem startled. Instead, he looked directly at me, then up at the security camera with an expression of eerie calmness. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then, unhurried, he turned and walked away, disappearing between the houses across the alley behind my property. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The police arrived within 15 minutes, but of course the man was long gone. They took my statement, reviewed the security footage, and promised to patrol the area more frequently. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on, a baseball bat beside my bed, and Max in my room with the door closed. Every creak of the house settling made me jump. I kept wondering what would have happened if I hadn't reviewed the camera footage. Would the man have eventually tried to enter my house? Was he just doing some sick experiment on a dog he found annoying? The not knowing was almost worse than anything else. The next day, I called a security company and upgraded my entire system. Better cameras, sensors on all windows and doors, and a direct line to a monitoring service. I also started asking around the neighborhood about the man I'd seen. It took 3 days before I got a hit. Mrs. Kaplowitz, an elderly woman who lived 2 streets over, recognized my description immediately. "That sounds like Walter Simmons," she said, lowering her voice like she was sharing gossip. "He lives in that blue house on Elm, the one with all the bird feeders. Keeps to himself mostly. Been there about 5 years, I think. Moved here after his wife died." It wasn't much, but it was something. I drove by the blue house later that day, noting the address and the no trespassing sign in the front yard. The irony wasn't lost on me. I reported the information to the police, who said they'd look into it. A week passed. Max stayed inside at night, though I'd take him for leashed walks during daylight hours. The sedative gradually worked its way out of his system, and to my immense relief, he started barking again. First at the mailman, then at a squirrel that dared to climb the tree near our front window. Each bark felt like a small victory. The police stopped by to update me. They'd questioned Walter Simmons, who denied any involvement but couldn't account for his whereabouts on the nights in question. Without more evidence than a somewhat grainy video, they couldn't arrest him, but they had issued a warning and would continue to monitor the situation. "Do you have any idea why he would do this?" I asked the officer. "We're not sure," he admitted. "He has no criminal record, no history of animal abuse. We did notice he has a clear view of your backyard from his upstairs window. One theory is that your dog's barking bothered him, and this was his solution. But that didn't explain why he kept coming back after Max stopped barking. It didn't explain the calm, almost expectant look on his face when our eyes met." 3 days later, a neighbor told me Walter Simmons had put his house up for sale and moved away without telling anyone where he was going. Just packed up and left overnight. The police investigation continued, but hit dead ends. They found that Simmons had worked as a pharmacist before retiring, which explained his access to sedatives. They discovered he'd had noise complaints filed against previous neighbors in another city, but nothing explained the methodical way he'd approached my dog night after night, gaining his trust, disabling my living alarm system. As winter deepened in Buffalo, I found myself jumping at shadows, checking the security cameras obsessively. I installed a higher fence with concrete footings that went deep into the ground. I stopped letting Max out unsupervised, even during the day. The police eventually closed the case without charges. "Some people are just odd," the detective told me, as if that explained everything. But I knew better. There was something calculated about what Walter Simmons had done, the patience it took to gain my dog's trust night after night, the precision in the dosage that wouldn't kill Max but would keep him quiet. The way he looked directly at me and the camera when caught, not with fear or shame, but with that unnervingly calm expression. It's been 3 months now. Max barks at everything again, and I've never been happier to be woken up at 3 a.m. by him losing his mind over a raccoon in the trash can. But I still check the cameras every night. I still keep the baseball bat by my bed. I still wonder what Walter Simmons wanted. Why he chose my house, my dog, my security to systematically dismantle. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't just what happened. It's what could have happened if I hadn't noticed the change in Max's behavior. How long would Simmons have continued coming to our fence? What was the next step in whatever plan he had? Would I have woken up one night to find him standing over my bed, having silenced the only thing that would have warned me of his presence? I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again. The most terrifying part isn't the stranger in the night. It's the deliberate patience of someone who was willing to spend weeks systematically dismantling my security, one silent night at a time. I still check my locks 3 times before going to bed. I still wake up at the slightest creak in the middle of the night. I still catch myself holding my breath whenever I see a white sedan drive past my house. It's been 8 months since that night, and I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe in my own home again. After finally breaking free from my 6-year marriage to Mike, I'd found a modest little 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb about 40 minutes from where we used to live together. Nothing fancy, just a 1970s ranch style with dated wallpaper in the kitchen and creaky hardwood floors, but it was mine. Every mortgage payment, every piece of furniture, every decision was finally mine alone. I can't explain how liberating that felt after years of walking on eggshells, of apologizing for opinions, of shrinking myself smaller and smaller until I barely recognized myself. The divorce had been messy. Mike didn't take it well. There had been crying, pleading, then anger, then cold silence, and finally a reluctant signature on the papers. When I moved out, he didn't help, didn't call, didn't acknowledge I was leaving. My friends helped me move while he was at work. The last text he sent me just said, "You'll regret this." Classic Mike. Never outright threatening, just vague enough to make me feel uneasy while maintaining plausible deniability. But I was determined to start fresh. New job at a medical billing office. Nothing exciting but stable hours and decent pay. New friends from a book club I joined. New routines that were all about what I wanted. For 3 months, everything was perfect. Well, not perfect, but peaceful. No one questioning why I was going to bed at 9:30 or making comments about how much I spent on groceries or accidentally scheduling something when I had plans with friends. Then the locks started acting up. The first time it happened, I was exhausted after pulling a double shift covering for a coworker. It was almost midnight. My feet were killing me, and all I wanted was to collapse on my couch with a glass of wine and mindless TV. I put my key in the front door lock and nothing. It wouldn't turn. I jiggled it, pulled it out, tried again. Nothing. I switched to my backup key. Still nothing. After 15 minutes of increasingly frustrated attempts, I gave up and called a 24-hour locksmith. The guy who showed up was friendly enough, middle-aged with a slight accent I couldn't place. He fiddled with the lock for a few minutes, then explained that the mechanism was worn out. "Happens all the time in these older homes," he said. "Previous owners probably used this lock for decades. Springs get weak, pins wear down." It made sense. The house was from the 70s, and who knows when the locks were last replaced. I paid the $165 ouch for the new lock and went inside, too tired to even drink that wine I'd been craving. 3 nights later, coming home from book club around 10 p.m., the same thing happened. Key went in but wouldn't turn. I stood there in disbelief, rain starting to drizzle down my neck, staring at the door like it had personally betrayed me. This time I called a different locksmith company, thinking maybe the first guy had installed a faulty lock. This locksmith was a complete contrast. Gruff, impatient, kept checking his phone while working on my door. He replaced the cylinder again, muttering about cheap materials these days and they don't make 'em like they used to. But something about his explanation didn't sit right with me. A brand new lock failing after 3 days? I've never been mechanically inclined, but even I knew that was fishy. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound had me sitting bolt upright in bed, heart pounding. Was someone trying to break in? Was I being paranoid? The next morning, I went to a hardware store and bought a small security camera that connected to my phone. Nothing fancy or expensive, just a basic model that I could mount above my front door. The guy at the store helped me set it up, and I positioned it to capture anyone approaching my door. For 5 nights, nothing happened. The lock worked fine. The camera recorded nothing but a few delivery people, a neighbor walking their dog, and a lost pizza guy looking for another address. I started to relax, thinking maybe I had just had a streak of bad luck with crappy locks. Then everything changed. I came home from work on a Tuesday, normal day, normal commute. The lock worked perfectly. I made dinner, watched some TV, scrolled through social media, and went to bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to use the bathroom. While up, I checked my phone out of habit and noticed a motion alert from my security camera from earlier that night. I figured it was just a raccoon or something, but decided to check anyway. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. from the previous night when I'd been asleep. The footage showed a person in a dark hoodie approaching my front door. Their face was angled away from the camera, but I could see they were wearing gloves, and they had tools. My stomach dropped as I watched this person methodically remove my lock cylinder, taking their time, working with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Then they opened my door and went inside. My house, while I was sleeping inside. I nearly threw up right there on my bathroom floor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone as I fast-forwarded through the footage. The hooded figure didn't come out for 3 hours. 3 hours in my house while I slept, unaware. Then they emerged, carefully replaced the lock cylinder, and disappeared into the darkness. I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I called 911. I know I was hyperventilating. I know I barricaded myself in the bathroom with a pair of scissors until the police arrived, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. The officer who responded was a woman, maybe in her 40s, with short gray hair and kind eyes. Officer Mendez, I think. She watched the footage, took notes, and looked around my house. Nothing seemed to be missing. No drawers ransacked, no electronics gone, no obvious signs that anyone had been there at all. "Do you have anyone who might want to scare you?" she asked. "An ex, maybe. Someone upset with you." "Mike. It had to be Mike." "My ex-husband," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The divorce was finalized 4 months ago. He didn't take it well. She advised me to stay somewhere else temporarily while they investigated. I packed a bag with shaking hands and went to my friend Amber's place. I couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop shaking. The idea that someone, that Mike, had been in my home, walking around while I slept, made me feel violated in a way I can't even describe. The next day, Officer Mendez called. They'd canvassed the neighborhood and found another security camera, 2 houses down, that had captured a white sedan parked on the street during the time frame of the intrusion. The car was registered to Mike. When they brought him in for questioning, he initially denied everything, but faced with the video evidence, he finally admitted what he'd been doing. He'd been systematically jamming and changing my locks as a form of control to make me feel crazy, to remind me that he could still affect my life even though we were divorced. He'd been entering my house regularly for weeks, just walking around, looking through my things, sometimes sitting in my bedroom watching me sleep. The first locksmith had been legitimate. I really did have a worn-out lock. But Mike had seen me calling the locksmith from his car parked down the street. He'd been following me, and it had given him the idea. The second locksmith? That was Mike himself, in a disguise he'd purchased online using a fake company name. He'd replaced my working lock with one he could manipulate, giving himself access whenever he wanted. They found locksmith tools in his car. They found a bag with gloves, the hoodie from the video, and a notebook with details about my daily schedule. He'd been watching me for months, learning my patterns, waiting for the right moment to start his sick game. The police arrested him for breaking and entering, stalking, and a host of other charges. I got a restraining order immediately. He eventually took a plea deal. I don't know the details because I couldn't bear to follow the case closely. I just know he's serving time, though not as much as he deserves. I've done everything possible to protect myself. I hired a professional security company to install high-grade deadbolts, motion sensors at every entry point, and cameras covering every angle of my property. I changed my work shifts randomly for months, so no one could predict when I'd be home. I limited who knows my address and daily routines. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and moved to a new address that only 5 people in the world know about. I pay extra for a P.O. box in a different zip code. I vary my routes home. I check my car for tracking devices regularly, but the damage is done. I jump when my phone rings. I sleep with a baseball bat beside my bed. I installed a doorbell camera that sends alerts to both my phone and my best friend's phone, just in case something happens to me. I've become the person I never wanted to be, suspicious, anxious, perpetually looking over my shoulder. There are still nights I wake up convinced someone is in my house, certain I hear footsteps in the hallway or breathing in the corner of my room. Sometimes I swear I can smell Mike's cologne lingering in the air, that distinctive sandalwood scent he always wore. Logic tells me it's impossible, but trauma doesn't listen to logic. The worst part is knowing how long it went on before I caught him. How many nights did he stand over my bed while I slept? What did he do during those hours in my house? The not knowing is almost worse than the truth. I keep asking myself how I missed the signs, but the truth is, there were signs. I just didn't connect them. Small things would be moved or missing. I'd find coffee cups I didn't remember using. My laptop would be in a slightly different position than I left it. I always blamed my own forgetfulness or stress from the divorce and new job. The detective later told me, this is classic stalker behavior. They start small, testing boundaries, seeing what they can get away with before escalating. Mike was playing a long game, gradually increasing his intrusions while gaslighting me into thinking I was just being forgetful or paranoid. I'm sharing this because I want others to trust their instincts. If something feels wrong, even something small like a lock that suddenly stops working, pay attention. Install cameras. Tell friends. Document everything. Sometimes those small warning signs are the only warnings you'll get before something truly terrifying happens. I still don't feel safe. I'm not sure I ever will again. Every time I put my key in a lock, I hold my breath, afraid it won't turn. Every night when I go to bed, I still check the closets and under the bed, like a child afraid of monsters. Only my monster was real. My monster had a name and a face I once loved. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if he ever took pictures of me sleeping. if he made copies of my keys that the police didn't find, if he's told someone else how to find me, if he's waiting for his release date to start the game all over again. They say time heals all wounds, but some wounds leave scars that change who you are forever. I'm stronger now, more cautious, more prepared, but I miss the person I was before, the one who could come home after dark and not scan the street for white cars, who could fall asleep without checking the locks 3 times, who didn't feel the need to have an escape bag packed and ready by the door. I hope sharing this helps someone else recognize the warning signs I missed. Don't ignore your intuition. Don't brush off strange occurrences. And please, please, if you're leaving someone controlling, protect yourself more thoroughly than you think necessary. Change your locks, install cameras, vary your routines, tell trusted friends where you are, because some people can't let go, and they'll go to unimaginable lengths to maintain the illusion of control. I don't know how to start this, honestly. My hands are still shaking as I type. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Mia, 28, living in Oak Ridge for the past 3 years in a small 2-story house. Nothing special, just a normal place in a quiet neighborhood where I thought I was safe. That's the thing that messes with your head the most, thinking you're safe when you're not. It happened last Wednesday. I'd had a brutal day at the marketing firm where I work. My boss had dumped a last-minute project on me that kept me at the office until almost 7 p.m. All I wanted was to come home, order some Chinese food, and zone out in front of the TV. Normal stuff, you know, things we all do without thinking twice. When I pulled into my driveway, nothing seemed off, not at first. I remember fumbling with my keys at the front door because my phone kept buzzing with work emails. I finally got inside, kicked off my heels, and headed straight to the kitchen to grab a much-needed glass of wine. That's when I noticed it. The kitchen window above my sink was open about 3 inches. Not wide open, just enough to make me stop and stare at it. I specifically remember thinking, did I leave that open this morning? But I knew I hadn't. It was October, and the mornings had been chilly. I'd been running my heat, not opening windows. I went over to close it and noticed something that made my stomach drop. The lock mechanism was bent, like someone had forced it from the outside. It wasn't completely broken, just warped. I ran my finger over it, feeling this weird sense of violation creep up my spine. My first instinct was to check if anything was missing. I did a quick walkthrough of the house, living room, dining room, upstairs bedrooms, bathroom. Nothing seemed out of place or stolen. My laptop was still on the coffee table. My TV was still mounted on the wall. Even the little jewelry box where I keep my grandmother's ring was untouched. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe I had left the window open a crack after all and the wind had damaged the lock somehow. Or maybe it had been like that for ages and I'd never noticed. I'm not exactly a DIY expert. I spend more time at work than I do paying attention to house maintenance. So I did what any exhausted person would do. I convinced myself it was nothing. I ordered my Chinese food, poured that glass of wine, and decided to distract myself with a horror movie on Netflix. In hindsight, probably not the smartest choice given what was about to happen. I ended up watching The Strangers, of all things. By the time I finished the movie and my food, it was almost 11 p.m. I was about to head upstairs to get ready for bed when I heard it for the first time, a creaking sound from above me. At first I froze, wine glass halfway to my mouth. The creaking continued, slow and rhythmic, like footsteps moving across the floorboards. Step, creak, step, creak, directly above the living room. I muted the TV. The sound continued. "Hello," I called out, immediately hating myself for doing the exact thing I always yell at horror movie characters for doing. The creaking stopped. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, completely still, barely breathing. Nothing. Just silence. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses make noise, right? Mine was built in the 70s. It probably had all kinds of weird quirks I hadn't discovered yet, but I wasn't taking any chances. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a broom. Pathetic, I know, but it was better than nothing. I crept up the stairs, wincing at every creak my own feet made on the steps. I checked my bedroom first. Nothing. The guest room. Nothing. The bathroom. Empty. The only place left was the small attic space, accessible via a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. I stood beneath it, staring up, broom clutched in my sweaty hands. There was no way I was going up there. No freaking way. Instead, I tugged on the cord once to see if the ladder would come down on its own. It didn't. It stayed firmly in place, requiring the kind of deliberate pull that suggested no one had accessed it recently. I convinced myself the sound had been my imagination, fueled by a scary movie and the mysterious open window. I decided to go to bed, double-checking all the doors and windows first. I even pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door, not enough to block it completely, but enough that I'd hear if someone tried to push it open. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have. What I do remember with perfect clarity is waking up at exactly 3:07 a.m., not because of a nightmare or a random noise, but because of unmistakable footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom, heavy, deliberate, slow. This wasn't the house settling. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was in my house. My entire body went cold. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. Then the handle turned slowly. The door pushed against the dresser with a soft scraping sound. I lunged for my phone on the nightstand, nearly knocking it to the floor. My fingers were shaking so badly I had to try twice to dial 911. The dresser kept inching forward as whoever was on the other side pushed harder against the door. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice sounded a million miles away. Someone's in my house, I whispered, my voice cracking. They're trying to get into my bedroom right now. I gave her my address while watching the gap between my door and the frame widen. The operator told me to stay on the line and find somewhere to hide. Police were on their way, she said, but it would be a few minutes. I slid off the bed and onto the floor, crawling toward my closet. The dresser was still moving, inch by torturous inch. I could see a shadow in the widening gap now. Just darkness, but moving, shifting. Then I heard the sirens in the distance. The pressure on the door immediately stopped. There were rapid footsteps down the hall, then down the stairs. A door slammed somewhere below. By the time the police arrived 5 minutes later, I was still huddled in my closet, phone clutched to my ear, too terrified to move. The police searched the house thoroughly. They found the back door wide open. That was the slam I'd heard. The kitchen window was still unlocked from earlier, but whoever had been there was gone. I thought that would be the end of it. A terrifying break-in, a narrow escape. But what they found next made everything so much worse. One of the officers decided to check the attic, pulling down the ladder I'd been too scared to open earlier. I stood at the bottom, watching as he climbed up and shined his flashlight around. His reaction told me immediately that he'd found something. "Ma'am, do you have internet service in your home?" he asked, climbing back down. I nodded, confused by the question. "You might want to see this." he said, gesturing for me to follow him up. I hesitated but climbed the ladder. The attic was small, dusty, and mostly empty except for some Christmas decorations and old suitcases. But in the corner, nearly hidden behind a stack of boxes, was a small electronic setup. Cables ran along the floor to a device I didn't recognize, some kind of signal booster connected to an external antenna that had been positioned near a small vent in the attic wall. "Do you know what this is?" the officer asked. I shook my head, feeling sick. "Someone's been using your home to piggyback on your Wi-Fi," he explained. "This setup amplifies your signal and broadcasts it outside, probably to someone in a car or a nearby building. Based on how it's installed, they've been coming and going for a while." "Weeks," said the other officer who joined us. "Maybe longer. The dust pattern suggests this has been here for some time." Weeks. The word echoed in my head. Someone had been in my home, in my attic for weeks, coming and going as they pleased, while I slept, while I showered, while I lived my life thinking I was alone. The police took the equipment for evidence. They explained that people sometimes set up these unauthorized connections to conduct illegal activities online without the traffic being traced back to them. Downloads, uploads, communications, all routed through my innocent IP address while they remained anonymous. They told me it wasn't random. These people research their targets, choosing homes where the residents have predictable schedules, homes where they can enter and exit unseen. My regular 8 to 6 workday, my habit of going to my parents every Sunday, my Thursday night yoga class. They'd been watching me. The only reason I caught them was because I'd come home earlier than usual that day. I'd disrupted their pattern. They'd probably come back that night to retrieve their equipment, not expecting me to be awake. The police took fingerprints, but whoever did this had been careful. No usable prints, no DNA evidence, no clear images on any nearby security cameras. Just the knowledge that strangers had been using my home as their personal internet cafe for God knows what purposes. I couldn't stay there that night. I went to a hotel, then to my parents' house for a few days. When I finally returned home, I went into full security mode. I spent nearly $2,000 on new locks, window sensors, motion detectors, and cameras. I had a friend who works in IT completely overhaul my Wi-Fi security with every protection he could think of. I even had the attic entrance sealed shut. I'd rather never use it again than wonder who might be up there. That was 3 months ago. The police never found who did it. They told me these kinds of operations are usually run by small groups who move from target to target. They're probably already set up in someone else's house now. I still check every lock before bed. I still wake up at the smallest sound. I've developed this habit of randomly coming home at unexpected times, just to make sure no one's there who shouldn't be. My power bill has doubled because I keep lights on all night. But the worst part isn't the fear or the paranoia or even the invasion of privacy. It's knowing they chose me specifically. They studied me. They knew my routines, my habits. They knew when I would and wouldn't be home. They watched me long enough to feel comfortable turning my private space into their crime hub. Sometimes I wonder if they're still watching, waiting for me to relax my guard, to slip back into predictable patterns, to become a suitable target again. I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe in my own home again. Home is supposed to be your sanctuary, the one place in the world where you can let your guard down. They took that from me, not by taking my possessions, but by taking my peace of mind. If you're reading this and thinking it couldn't happen to you, that's exactly what I thought too. Check your Wi-Fi network for devices you don't recognize. Vary your routines. Install a security system. and maybe, occasionally, come home when you're not supposed to. You never know who might be counting on you not to. I'm still not sleeping right nearly 4 years later. I've moved twice since then, but it doesn't matter. Every noise, every creak in any place I live now sends me into a panic. I check locks 3 times before bed. I've got cameras that notify my phone of any movement. My therapist says I'm making progress, but she doesn't understand. She didn't live through it. I bought my first house in 2017. A small 2-bedroom craftsman built in the 1930s in a quiet neighborhood not far from the elementary school where I teach 4th grade. It had character. That's what the realtor kept saying. Wood floors, built-in bookshelves, those little architectural details you don't get in newer construction. I fell in love with it immediately. The price was right. The inspection came back mostly clean. Just some minor electrical work needed. And I moved in that October. For the first few months, everything was perfect. I'd come home from teaching, grade papers at my dining room table, and feel this sense of pride that I, Emma Wilson, 29 years old, single, first-generation college graduate, owned my own home. I adopted a cat from the local shelter in December, Luna, a grey tabby who follows me everywhere. She settled in quickly, claiming the sunny spot on the living room windowsill as her domain. The noises started around April 2018. Just little things at first. A soft scraping sound inside the wall of my bedroom. I figured it was mice. The house was old, after all. I put out traps in the kitchen and basement, but never caught anything. It was irritating, but I could sleep through it. By June, the sounds had changed. Instead of random scratching, it became more deliberate, like something dragging across the inside of the wall. It always started around 11 p.m., right when I'd be getting ready for bed. It would go on for maybe 15 minutes, then stop. I began to wonder if maybe it wasn't mice, but something bigger, a raccoon or a squirrel that had found its way into the attic or walls. Luna noticed it too. She'd sit in the hallway, staring at a specific section of wall, her tail all puffed up. Sometimes she'd hiss at nothing. I'd never seen her do that before, and it freaked me out more than the sounds themselves. I called an exterminator in July. Bill was a middle-aged guy with a graying beard who seemed to know his stuff. He spent nearly 2 hours looking around the house, in the attic, around the foundation, checking the vents. He didn't find a single dropping or any evidence of animals. "My guess is squirrels getting in through the soffit," he said, pointing to a small gap near the roofline. "They can squeeze through spaces smaller than you'd think." He set up humane traps in the attic and said he'd come back in a week to check. When he returned, the traps were empty. The noises continued and were getting louder. I started to hear them in different places, not just my bedroom wall, but also moving along the hallway toward the closet. By August, I wasn't sleeping well. The sounds had a pattern now. They'd start around 11 p.m., like someone dragging themselves along the interior of the wall from the direction of the basement toward my hallway closet. Then they'd stop for a while. Later, usually around 2 or 3 a.m., I'd hear them going back the other way. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked. I know that sounds ridiculous, like a door would stop whatever was in the walls, but it made me feel safer somehow. Luna refused to sleep in my room anymore. She'd spend nights perched on top of the refrigerator, her eyes wide, watching. The exterminator came back twice more. He set different traps, sprayed some repellent around the foundation, sealed up a few small gaps he found. Nothing changed. The noises continued. "I don't know what to tell you," Bill finally admitted. "There's no evidence of any animals. Maybe it's just the house settling. But houses don't settle on a schedule. Houses don't make noises that sound like deliberate movement. I started staying at my friend Jess's house on weekends, making excuses about my water heater acting up or my AC being out. I couldn't tell her the truth, that I was afraid of my own walls. How crazy would that sound? Then came August 23rd. I remember the date exactly because it was a teacher work day, the Friday before school started. I'd spent the day setting up my classroom and came home exhausted around 6 p.m. Luna wasn't at the door to greet me, which was unusual. I found her hiding under the couch, and she wouldn't come out, even for treats. I tried to grade some beginning-of-year assessments, but couldn't focus. The house felt different, heavier somehow. I can't explain it exactly, like the air was thicker or like someone was watching me. I kept looking over my shoulder, jumping at every normal house sound. By 10 p.m., I decided to just go to bed early. Maybe I was just on edge because of the start of the school year. But as I was brushing my teeth, I heard it, the dragging sound, but it was earlier than usual and louder, much louder, like whatever was making it didn't care about being quiet anymore. I stood frozen in my bathroom, toothbrush still in my mouth, as the sound moved along the wall toward the hallway closet. Then it stopped, and there was a new sound, a soft thump, like something being set down. Then silence. I don't know where I found the courage, but something inside me snapped. I was done being afraid in my own home. I spit out my toothpaste, grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, and a heavy flashlight from under the sink that could double as a weapon. The hallway was dark. I switched on the light and stared at the closet door. It was a simple sliding door that housed my winter coats, some board games, extra blankets. Nothing special. I'd used it regularly since moving in. I stood there for what felt like forever, listening. Nothing. No sound at all. Even the normal creaks of the house had gone silent. Luna was nowhere to be seen. Slowly, I approached the closet and slid the door open. Everything looked normal at first glance. Coats hanging on the rod. Boxes of Christmas decorations stacked in the corner. The vacuum cleaner. I started pulling everything out. Coats, boxes, the vacuum. A storage bin with old photo albums. I piled it all in the hallway until the closet was empty. And that's when I saw it. At the very back of the closet, where the wall should have been solid, there was a seam. A thin line running from floor to ceiling that didn't match the wood paneling pattern. I never would have noticed it if the closet had been full. But empty, with the light hitting it just right, it was unmistakable. It looked like a door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I took a picture of it, like I needed proof of what I was seeing. Then I ran my fingers along the seam. There was no handle, no obvious way to open it. But when I pressed on one side, I felt it give slightly. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a flathead screwdriver. Back at the closet, I wedged the screwdriver into the seam and pried. The panel came loose easier than I expected, swinging inward to reveal a narrow crawl space behind the wall. The smell hit me first. Body odor, urine, stale food. My light beam revealed a space about 3 feet wide that ran along the interior wall. And there, arranged on the plywood floor, was a filthy sleeping bag surrounded by food wrappers. My food wrappers. Empty containers from my kitchen. A half-eaten granola bar, the kind I kept in my pantry. A plastic water bottle refilled from my tap. And a small, cracked flashlight. Someone had been living in my walls. I stumbled backward, falling against the opposite wall of the hallway. My phone clattered to the floor. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My brain kept refusing to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. But it was. Someone had created a space inside my house. Someone had been sleeping feet away from me, separated only by drywall. Someone had been listening to me, watching me through God knows what holes or cracks, eating my food when I wasn't home or was asleep. I scrambled for my phone and ran outside to my front porch, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. I couldn't form complete sentences when the dispatcher answered. Someone in my house, in the walls, living in my walls. The police arrived in what felt like hours, but was probably less than 10 minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman. They entered cautiously, hands on their weapons. I stood on the sidewalk, unable to go back inside. Luna had bolted out the door when I opened it and was hiding under my car. I heard them calling clear as they moved through my house. Then a long silence. When the female officer came out, her face was grim. "Ma'am, you need to come see this." I shook my head. I already knew what they'd found. "There's no one there now," she said gently. "But we need you to identify if anything is missing." Somehow I made it back inside. The male officer was taking pictures of the crawl space, the sleeping bag, the food wrappers. He pointed his flashlight to show how the space extended toward the basement. "Looks like they accessed it through here, then created an entry point in your closet," he explained, shining his light down a narrow passage. "We found a basement window that's been tampered with. They probably came and went that way, maybe when you were at work." They asked me questions I couldn't really answer. How long had I lived there? Had I noticed anything missing? Had I heard noises? Yes, noises for months. No, I hadn't noticed anything missing except maybe some food. But I lived alone and didn't keep careful track. Yes, I had a security system, but I only armed it at night or when I went out of town. They took the sleeping bag and other items as evidence. They dusted for fingerprints. They told me they'd increase patrols in the neighborhood. They suggested I stay somewhere else for the night. I called Jess, who came immediately. I couldn't explain over the phone, just said there had been a break-in and I needed a place to stay. When she arrived and saw the police cars, the look on my face, she didn't ask questions. She just helped me pack a bag and get Luna into her carrier. I stayed with Jess for a week. I called a contractor the next day who came and inspected the crawl space. He sealed it permanently, reinforced every possible entry point to my home, installed motion-detecting lights around the exterior. He said it was probably just some homeless person looking for shelter. "Happens more often than you'd think with these older homes," he said, like that was supposed to make me feel better. The police never found who it was. They took DNA samples from the sleeping bag, but there were no matches in their database. They found fingerprints, but same thing, no matches. They said it was likely a transient, someone passing through. They increased patrols in my neighborhood for a few weeks. Then things went back to normal. Except nothing was normal anymore. I couldn't sleep in that house, couldn't use that closet even though it was sealed up tight, couldn't stop imagining someone watching me through the walls. I put the house on the market in October. It sold quickly. I priced it to move and didn't disclose what had happened. Maybe that was wrong, but I just needed out. I moved into an apartment with concrete walls. I installed extra locks, cameras, motion sensors. I adopted a second cat, a big male who's more like a guard dog. I see a therapist weekly, but I still check inside every closet, behind every shower curtain. I still wake up at the smallest sound. I still wonder who they were, what they wanted, how long they had been there before I discovered them. Had they been watching me sleep? Had they stood over my bed while I was unconscious? The thing that haunts me most isn't the invasion itself. It's not knowing when it began. That hidden door didn't create itself. The crawl space existed when I bought the house. How many owners before me never knew? Or did they know and not disclose it when they sold the house, just like I didn't? Sometimes I wonder if they're doing it to someone else now, living in another person's walls, watching, waiting. I wonder if that person hears strange noises at night and dismisses them, like I did for too long. So if you're reading this and you hear scratching in your walls, don't ignore it. Don't assume it's just mice or your house settling. Check every closet. Look for seams that shouldn't be there. Because the worst monsters aren't the ones that hide under your bed. They're the ones that hide inside your walls, watching you live your life, invading your most private spaces, and you never even know they're there until it's too late. I still have trouble sleeping at night. It's been 4 months since it happened, but every time I hear a floorboard creak or the heater kick on, I'm instantly wide awake, heart pounding. I keep wondering how long he was down there before I found him. Days? Weeks? The whole semester? I'll never know for sure, and that's what keeps me up at night. Back in January, I rented this small 2-bedroom house about a mile from campus. It was perfect for a broke grad student, cheap enough that I could afford it alone on my teaching assistant stipend. The place was nothing special, built in the 70s, outdated kitchen, worn carpet, but it had this amazing little study with built-in bookshelves where I could work on my thesis. The backyard had this tall wooden fence that separated it from a supermarket parking lot. I actually liked that location because it meant I could walk to grab groceries without driving. The only part of the house I hated was the basement. It was unfinished, just concrete floors, exposed pipes, and those dim hanging bulbs that never seemed bright enough. The walls were that old cinder block style that always felt damp no matter the weather. The stairs down to it creaked so loudly you could hear them throughout the house. I only went down there when I absolutely had to, like to grab the box fan during a hot spell or to reset the circuit breaker. That night, March 12th, I was deep into writing my thesis chapter. Spring break had just started, so campus was empty, and I'd planned a solid week of uninterrupted work. I remember it was around 11:30 p.m., and I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, determined to finish this section before sleeping. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, completely absorbed in my work. Then everything went dark. At first, I thought it was a neighborhood blackout, but when I went to the window, I could see the streetlights were still on. My neighbors' houses still had lights too. It was just my place. Great. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight and made my way to the kitchen where I kept a proper flashlight in a drawer. The house felt different in the dark, larger somehow, with more corners and shadows. I swept my phone light across the living room, feeling uneasy for no reason I could name. The circuit breaker was in the basement, of course. I stood at the top of those creaky stairs, delaying the inevitable. The basement door was always kept closed. I hated even seeing it, but now I had to go down there in the pitch black. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. The hinges whined like they always did. My phone light barely penetrated the darkness as I carefully made my way down. Each step groaned under my weight. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step. The basement was always about 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house. I could smell that distinct musty basement smell, damp concrete, dust, and something else I could never identify. I reached the bottom and swept my light across the room. The washing machine and dryer sat against one wall. My stored Christmas decorations and old textbooks were stacked in milk crates in one corner. The water heater hummed quietly. The circuit breaker was on the far wall, past the boiler. The beam of my phone flashlight wasn't very powerful, and I was cursing myself for not bringing the kitchen flashlight when I saw something move behind the boiler. I froze, thinking it might be a raccoon or maybe a stray cat that had somehow gotten in. I directed my light toward the movement. It wasn't an animal. There was a man crouched behind my boiler. He was thin, with a pale face that looked almost gray in the harsh light of my phone. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring directly at me. He wore a dark hoodie and jeans. He wasn't moving at all, just watching me with those unblinking eyes. His fingers were curled around the edge of the boiler like he was bracing himself. For what felt like minutes but was probably just seconds, we stared at each other. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There was a stranger in my basement. There was a man in my house. Then he moved. He lunged forward suddenly, rushing past me toward the stairs. I was so shocked I didn't even yell. I just stumbled backward, hitting my shoulder hard against the washing machine, nearly dropping my phone. He was incredibly fast. I only caught a glimpse of his face as he passed me. His expression was wild, panicked. I heard him scrambling up the stairs, the wood creaking loudly under his frantic footsteps. Instead of going up to the main floor, I heard a different door open. A door I rarely used that led directly from the basement to the backyard. It had always been locked, I thought. I heard it slam shut. My whole body was shaking so badly I could barely stand. I managed to get to the stairs and climbed them as fast as I could, convinced he might come back. I locked the basement door behind me, then ran to check all the exterior doors and windows. The back door leading to the yard was unlocked. Had I left it that way? I was usually so careful. I called 911, my voice shaking so badly the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat myself several times. While I waited for the police, I armed myself with a heavy Maglite flashlight from the kitchen and sat with my back against the front door, facing the basement door. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. Every sound, the refrigerator humming, the wind against the windows, made me jump. The police arrived about 15 minutes later, 2 officers, a man and a woman. They took my statement, then did a thorough search of the house and yard. I waited in my car, still shaking, watching as their flashlights swept across my backyard, illuminating the wooden fence separating my property from the supermarket parking lot. One of the officers called me back inside. "Sir, you need to see this," he said, leading me to the basement. I didn't want to go back down there, but I followed anyway. The officers had turned on the power. Apparently a main switch had been flipped off, and the bare bulbs cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor. Behind the water heater, partially hidden by some old storage boxes, was a black duffel bag. The officer carefully unzipped it. Inside were electronics still in their packaging: wireless earbuds, smartphone accessories, small Bluetooth speakers. There were also several wallets, pieces of jewelry, and watches. All of it looked new, like it had just been purchased or stolen. "Looks like someone's been using your basement to store stolen merchandise," the female officer said. But that wasn't all. In the far corner of the basement, behind some old paint cans, they found signs someone had been living there. There was a dirty blanket spread on the floor, several empty soda cans, fast food wrappers, and a plastic bag filled with trash. There was even a phone charger plugged into an outlet I hadn't even known existed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Someone had been living in my basement. While I worked upstairs, slept upstairs, lived my life completely unaware, there had been someone down here, coming and going, watching, waiting. Most of this stuff probably came from the supermarket next door, the male officer explained. Based on the receipts in these bags, some of this was stolen just yesterday. They told me this was unusual. Typically, thieves used public places to stash stolen goods, dumpsters, abandoned buildings, wooded areas, not someone's private residence. The officer suggested the thief probably accessed my basement through the back door that led to the yard. From there, it would have been easy to hop the fence to the supermarket parking lot, steal whatever he could, and return to my basement to hide. "How long do you think he's been here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The officers exchanged glances. "Hard to say," the female officer replied. "But judging by the amount of trash and the setup, I'd guess at least a couple of weeks." A couple of weeks, possibly longer. Someone had been living in my house for weeks without my knowledge. The violation of that realization was overwhelming. The police took the duffel bag and its contents as evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, took photos, and filed a report. They offered to have an officer drive by regularly for the next few days, which I gratefully accepted. Before they left, they helped me check all the locks. The back door from the basement had a simple push-button lock that could be easily jimmied open. The deadbolt had been installed but wasn't being used. The strike plate was loose, like someone had deliberately loosened it. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the basement door and slept on the couch with all the lights on. I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me jump. I kept imagining the man's face, those wide, unblinking eyes staring at me from behind the boiler. The next day, I called a locksmith who came and installed new, better locks on all the doors, including a serious deadbolt on the basement door. I bought motion sensor lights for the backyard and set up a makeshift alarm system using a wedge doorstop with a battery-powered alarm. I even considered buying a gun, though I ultimately decided against it. None of it helped. I couldn't shake the feeling of violation, the knowledge that my private space had been invaded so completely. I'd been living my normal life, working, eating, sleeping, completely unaware that just below my feet, a stranger had made himself at home. How many times had he been down there while I was upstairs? Had he ever come upstairs while I was sleeping? The questions tormented me. A week later, I broke my lease and moved to an apartment closer to campus. It's on the 3rd floor, has a doorman and electronic key fob entry. I sleep better now, but not well. Not yet. What haunts me most isn't just that someone was in my home. It's that if not for that random power outage, I might never have known. How long would he have stayed? What else might he have done? I'll never know how long he had been using my basement as his personal hideout or what his ultimate intentions were. The police never caught him. They said the fingerprints didn't match anyone in their system. The stolen items were returned to the supermarket, but nothing was ever traced back to a specific individual. He's still out there somewhere. Maybe he's found another basement, another unsuspecting person to live beneath. I'm writing this partly as a warning. Check your basement, your attic, any unused spaces in your home. Install good locks. Pay attention to strange sounds. And if your power mysteriously goes out while the rest of the neighborhood stays lit, maybe call an electrician instead of checking it yourself. Every time I pass a house now, I can't help but wonder, who might be living there that doesn't belong? And do the real residents have any idea? I've been living in my little place near Talkeetna, Alaska, since 2012. It's nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom cabin with a wood stove, about 8 miles from the nearest neighbor. I moved here to get away from people, from noise, from the constant pressure of being around others. I used to love it when storms would roll in. There's something peaceful about being tucked away while nature does its thing outside. The wind howling through the pines, the way the whole house would creak and settle. It was comforting. Was. Everything changed last December. December 14th, 2017. I remember the date because I'd been watching the weather reports for days, knowing a big system was coming. By noon that day, the snow was already piling up, and the wind was picking up something fierce. I'd stocked up on supplies the weekend before, filled the generator with fuel, chopped extra wood, made sure I had enough food and water to last if the power went out. Just the usual winter prep up here. I spent most of the day reading and occasionally checking the windows to see how bad it was getting. By dinner time, visibility was down to maybe 15 feet, and the wind was screaming past my house. The power flickered a few times, but held. I heated up some stew I'd made the day before, poured myself a whiskey, and settled in for a night of Netflix and whatever books I felt like reading. Around 11:30, I decided to call it a night. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. 3 loud, deliberate knocks on my front door. Knock, knock, knock. 3 distinct sounds evenly spaced, not like a tree branch or debris hitting the house. This was intentional, a person's knock. At first, I thought maybe someone had gotten stranded in the storm and was looking for help. It happens up here sometimes, though rarely all the way out where I am. I rinsed my mouth, grabbed my flashlight, and headed for the door. I called out, "Just a second," as I approached. I remember hesitating before opening it. Something felt off. I turned on my porch light and peered through the peephole. Nothing, just swirling snow and darkness. I opened the door slowly, keeping the chain on. The wind nearly ripped it from my hand. I shined my flashlight out, sweeping the beam across my porch. No one was there, but something made my stomach drop. Fresh footprints in the snow, leading right up to my door and then back down the steps. They hadn't been there an hour earlier when I'd gone out to bring in more firewood. I closed and locked the door, checking twice that it was secure. I told myself it was probably just someone who realized they had the wrong house and left. Maybe they were embarrassed. But why would anyone be out in this storm and this far from town? I checked all the other doors and windows, making sure everything was locked up tight. The wind was still howling, rattling the windows and making the house creak. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd imagined the knock. Maybe it was just a branch or something blown by the wind. I had almost convinced myself I was being paranoid when it happened again. This time, the knocking came from my kitchen window. 3 knocks again. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. The kitchen window is on the side of my house, about 8 feet off the ground. Someone would have to be standing on something to reach it. I grabbed my flashlight and crept toward the kitchen. The knocking stopped. All I could hear was the storm and my own breathing. I flipped on the kitchen light and pulled back the curtain. Nothing there, just darkness and snow. But when I shined my flashlight down, I could see them. More fresh footprints in the snow beneath my window. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. No signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. I had a landline for emergencies, but when I picked it up, all I got was static. I was completely cut off. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and sat with my back against the wall, facing the window. I don't know how long I sat there, listening to the storm and jumping at every creak and groan of the house. It could have been 20 minutes or an hour. Then I heard it again, knocking. But this time it came from the back door. 3 knocks. Same pattern. Knock, knock, knock. Whoever it was, they were circling my house. I crept to the back door, knife clutched in my hand. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound authoritative, but my voice cracked. No answer, just the howling wind. I didn't open the door this time. Instead, I peered through the small window beside it. Again, nothing, but I could hear something else now beneath the wind, the crunch of footsteps in snow, moving away from the door and around the side of the house. This person, this thing, was systematically moving around my home, testing each entrance. I felt like a cornered animal. I moved to the center of the house, away from all windows and doors, and sat on the floor of my hallway. I clutched the knife so hard my knuckles went white. For the next few hours, the pattern continued. Knocking would come from different parts of the house. A window, a door, always in that same 3-knock pattern. I never saw anyone, just heard the knocks, and occasionally the sound of footsteps in the snow. Sometimes there would be a long pause, long enough that I'd begin to hope it was over, and then the knocking would start again from a completely different location. I don't think I've ever been so terrified in my life. There was something methodical about it, something calculating. This wasn't just some drunk person or lost hiker. Whoever was out there was trying to terrify me, to let me know they could get in at any time, from any direction. Around 4 a.m., the knocking stopped. The storm was starting to die down too. I stayed in the hallway, knife in hand, not daring to move until daylight. I must have dozed off at some point from sheer exhaustion because I woke up stiff and cold, with sunlight streaming through the windows. The storm had passed. In the clear morning light, everything seemed almost normal. Almost. I cautiously checked each window and door. No broken glass, no signs of forced entry. But when I finally worked up the courage to go outside, what I saw made my blood run cold. Boot prints, dozens of them. They formed a complete circle around my entire house, with detours to each door and window. One single set of tracks, going round and round. I could see where they stopped at each entry point. My front door, back door, the low window in my bathroom, the kitchen window. The tracks showed that whoever it was had dragged something, probably a crate or box, beneath the kitchen window to stand on. They'd thought this through. But the most disturbing thing? The tracks led away from my house and straight into the tree line. I stared at them for a long time before deciding to follow them. I know, that sounds stupid now, but I needed to know who had been out there, where they'd come from. I grabbed my warmest clothes, put on my boots, and took the knife with me. I followed the tracks into the woods, moving cautiously, constantly looking around. They went straight for about 200 yards before merging with another set of tracks, wide, mechanical tracks, snowmobile tracks. This person had parked their snowmobile just out of earshot of my house, hiked in on foot, spent hours terrorizing me, and then returned to their vehicle and left. The whole thing had been planned. I hurried back to my house, packed a bag, and drove the 20 miles to the nearest town on my barely plowed driveway. The roads were still being cleared, and it took me almost 2 hours to make the drive. At the police station, the officer took my report, but I could tell he wasn't taking it very seriously. Probably just some teenagers playing pranks, he said, or maybe a hunter got disoriented in the storm. But hunters don't circle a house for hours, methodically knocking on every entrance. And teenagers don't snowmobile 8 miles into the wilderness during a blizzard to scare some random homeowner. The officer promised to send someone out to look at the tracks, but by the time they got there the next day, another light snowfall had already started to cover them up. They took some photos, but said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence or if the person came back. I stayed in town for 3 nights at the only motel. I couldn't bring myself to go back to my house yet. On the 4th day, I drove to the nearest sporting goods store and bought a 9mm handgun a hunting rifle, and enough ammunition for both to last a long time. I'd never been interested in guns before, never felt like I needed one, but something had fundamentally changed for me. When I finally returned home, I spent the first day installing new deadbolts on all my doors, putting dowels in the tracks of all my sliding windows, and setting up motion-activated lights around the perimeter of my house. I cleaned both guns meticulously according to the instructions, loaded them, and kept the rifle by my front door and the handgun on my nightstand. That first night back was the longest night of my life. Every creak, every gust of wind, every shadow made me jolt awake, gun in hand, but nothing happened. No knocking, no footsteps, nothing. It's been almost a year now. I still live in the same house. I still love Alaska and the solitude, but it's different now. The woods that once brought me peace now hide potential threats. I find myself staring out the windows during storms, looking for movement in the swirling snow. I've installed security cameras and a generator-powered satellite internet connection, so I'm never completely cut off again. I keep trying to figure out why someone would do this. Was it random? Was I targeted? Was it someone I know? I've gone over and over it in my mind, but I can't make sense of it. The not knowing is almost worse than the night itself. The worst part is that the storms don't comfort me anymore. Now, when the wind picks up and snow starts to fall, I find myself checking the locks, making sure my guns are loaded, and listening, always listening, for those 3 deliberate knocks. I haven't heard them again, but I know deep down that if that person wanted to terrify me, to change how I feel about my home and my safety, they succeeded. And I can't shake the feeling that they're out there, waiting for the next big storm to come rolling in. I still can't explain what happened to me last winter. I've been fishing the lakes around Duluth my entire life, and I know ice. I mean, I really know ice. My dad taught me everything about it when I was just a kid, how to test it, read it, respect it. He'd drill a hole, show me the core, and say, "Tommy, you see that? Clear as glass and solid as a rock. That's what you want." We'd spend entire weekends out there, just him and me in our little pop-up shelter, waiting for northern pike to swim by. After Dad passed 3 years ago from a heart attack, I kept going out there alone. It wasn't just about the fish anymore. It was about feeling close to him somehow. Every time I drilled through that ice, I could almost hear him telling me to check the edges or watch your line tension. Stupid, maybe, but it helped. Anyway, last January we'd had a really solid freeze, like seriously solid. The ice on most lakes around Duluth was hitting 12, 15 inches, way more than the 4 inches you need to safely walk on. I'd been out multiple times already that season and had a productive spot on one of the smaller lakes, about 30 minutes outside town. I remember that Friday had been absolute hell at work. I'm a project manager at a construction company, and we were behind schedule on a major build. The client was breathing down my neck, my crew was burned out, and my boss was in panic mode. By the time I got home, all I wanted was some peace and quiet. Just me, my fishing gear, and a frozen lake. There was a blizzard in the forecast for Saturday, but nothing severe. Maybe 4 to 6 inches of snow throughout the day with some wind, but nothing us Minnesotans aren't used to. I packed up my gear Friday night, my auger, tip-ups, tackle box, portable shelter, a thermos of coffee, some sandwiches, and my emergency kit. Standard stuff. I got to the lake around 7 a.m. on Saturday. The snow had already started falling, but it was light. The parking area only had my truck in it, which wasn't surprising given the weather. Most casual fishermen wouldn't bother coming out when there's a storm approaching, but I actually prefer it. There's something about being out there when the snow is coming down. Everything gets muffled and still. Plus, the fish often bite better right before a pressure change. I unloaded my sled and dragged my gear about a quarter-mile out to my usual spot. The ice was rock solid under my feet, at least 10 inches thick. I know because I drilled a test hole near shore before heading out, just like Dad taught me. Clear blue ice, strong enough to drive a truck on if you wanted to. I wasn't worried at all. By the time I set up my shelter, the snow was coming down harder. Visibility was dropping fast, maybe 20 feet in any direction. I could barely make out the shoreline, just the dark outline of trees against all that white. I got my Coleman heater going, drilled my holes, set up my sonar, and dropped a line. The familiar ritual calmed me down almost immediately. All the stress from work just melted away. I'd been fishing for about an hour, just sipping coffee and watching my depth finder, when I noticed something through the small plastic window of my shelter. There was a dark figure standing out on the ice maybe 30 feet away. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The blowing snow can do that. But no, there was definitely someone out there, just standing still, facing my direction. I couldn't make out much about them, just a dark silhouette against the white. They were bundled up in what looked like heavy winter gear, but I couldn't see any fishing equipment, no sled, no auger, nothing. Just this person standing motionless in a blizzard. I remember feeling uneasy immediately. Who the hell would be out here in these conditions without gear, and why were they just standing there? I zipped up my coat and stepped outside my shelter, trying to get a better look. The wind hit me immediately, sharp and cold, driving snow into my face. I had to squint to keep my eyes from watering. "Hello?" I called out, my voice seeming to disappear into the swirling white. The figure started moving toward me, slow, deliberate steps. As they got closer, I could see it was a man, tall and broad-shouldered. He wore an old-style canvas coat, the kind my grandfather used to wear ice fishing in the 60s. A wool scarf was wrapped around the lower half of his face, and a well-worn cap was pulled low over his eyes. His hands were stuffed deep in his pockets. He stopped about 10 feet from me. I still couldn't see his face clearly through the snow and the scarf, just his eyes, dark and intent. "The ice isn't safe today," he said. His voice was clear despite the wind, deep and certain. I remember laughing nervously. "The ice is fine. It's at least 10 inches thick. I checked." He shook his head slowly. "Not today. It isn't safe today. Look, I appreciate the concern, but I've been fishing this lake for years. The ice is solid." He just stared at me for a long moment, then said, "You should leave now, while you can." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, quickly disappearing into the white curtain of the blizzard. The whole interaction felt wrong. Something about his eyes, his confidence, the way he just appeared and disappeared. I stood there for a minute, the wind cutting through my layers, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I tried to shake it off. Probably just some local looking out for strangers, I told myself. Maybe an old-timer who knew something about the lake I didn't. But I'd checked the ice myself. It was solid. And this was my spot. I'd been here countless times. I went back into my shelter, but I couldn't focus on fishing anymore. The man's warning kept replaying in my head. I kept looking out the small window, half expecting to see him standing there again. But there was nothing but swirling snow. About 15 minutes later, I heard it, a crack. Not a little crack, like ice sometimes makes when it's shifting. This was loud, like a gunshot. It echoed across the lake, and I felt it under my feet. Then another and another. My heart started hammering. The shelter floor seemed to tilt ever so slightly. I pressed my hand against the ice and felt something impossible, movement. The solid platform I was sitting on was no longer solid. Another huge crack, and I swear I felt the ice drop a quarter-inch. I grabbed my phone and wallet and burst out of the shelter. The ice around me looked wrong. In the 15 feet or so I could see through the snow, dark lines were spreading like spider webs. Water was starting to seep up through the cracks. I've never moved so fast in my life. I left everything, my expensive auger, my tackle, my shelter, everything, and just ran toward shore. The ice groaned and shifted under my feet with every step. I heard splashing behind me and risked a glance back. My shelter was tilting, one edge already disappearing into dark water that shouldn't have been there. I don't remember the rest of that run, just the blind panic, the sound of cracking ice, and the constant certainty that the next step would be my last before plunging into the freezing water. Somehow, I made it to shore. My lungs were burning, my legs shaking. I collapsed on solid ground and looked back at the lake. Through gaps in the now heavy snow, I could just make out an area of open water where my shelter had been. Equipment worth over $1,000 was gone, but I was alive. That's when the strangest realization hit me. There were no footprints out there other than my own. None leading to where the man had stood, none leading away. In the areas where the snow hadn't yet covered the ice, there should have been some trace of him, but there was nothing. I made it back to my truck, cranked the heat as high as it would go, and sat there shaking for a good 20 minutes. Not just from the cold. When I could think straight again, I called the DNR to report the dangerous ice conditions. The officer who took my call sounded confused. According to their measurements from the day before, the ice on that lake was a consistent 14 inches, more than enough to support multiple people and structures. There must be a pressure crack or spring under where you were, he suggested. Sometimes warm water can flow up and thin the ice from below in specific spots. You're lucky you got out. I didn't tell him about the stranger with no footprints. It sounded crazy even in my own head. Over the next few days, I talked to people who fish that lake regularly. Nobody had seen anyone matching the man's description. In fact, according to the bait shop owner, nobody else had been out on the lake that day because of the blizzard forecast. I was the only one stupid enough to go out there. A week later, when I was having beers with my buddy Mike, who's lived in Duluth his whole life, I finally told someone the whole story, including the mysterious man. I expected him to laugh, but he got real quiet instead. My grandfather used to talk about something like that, he said finally. Called them ice watchers or something. Said they were the spirits of people who'd drowned in the lakes, coming back to warn others. That's just local superstition, I said, not believing it myself. Mike shrugged. Maybe, but there are a lot of stories around here about strangers appearing during blizzards or fog, warning people about danger, then disappearing. They're usually described wearing old-fashioned clothes. I haven't been back to that lake since. I've gone ice fishing on other lakes, but something changed after that day. I'm more cautious now. I check the ice obsessively. And sometimes when the snow starts coming down heavy and visibility drops, I catch myself scanning the white horizon, looking for a dark figure standing alone in the distance. I don't know who or what saved my life that day. Logic tells me it was just another fisherman who knew something about that spot that I didn't. But I can't explain the missing footprints, or why nobody else saw him, or how he knew the ice would break when all measurements said it was perfectly safe. All I know is that someone or something warned me, and I'm still here because of it. Sometimes I wonder if it was Dad somehow, still looking out for me like he always did. Other times I think about what Mike said about the spirits of those who drowned. Either way, I'm grateful. but I still get chills every time it snows. I still haven't shaken what happened at that cabin 3 weeks ago. I keep checking closets in my own apartment. I wake up at every little sound. My friends think I'm being dramatic, but they weren't there. I'm a construction worker at a high-rise development in Portland. The noise is constant. Jackhammers, power tools, shouting, trucks backing up with those piercing beeps. After 3 months of overtime and 6-day weeks, I desperately needed a break somewhere quiet. I found this cabin rental on Mount Hood. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom place with a fireplace, about 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, according to the listing. Perfect. The weather forecast showed a snowstorm coming in, but that just made it more appealing. Being snowed in somewhere peaceful sounded like heaven compared to another weekend of construction noise. I drove up on Friday afternoon following the GPS down increasingly narrow roads. The last stretch wasn't even paved, just gravel covered with a few inches of fresh snow. I was glad I'd brought my truck. The cabin appeared exactly as advertised, small, rustic, surrounded by pines, with smoke curling from the chimney. Wait, smoke? I double-checked the reservation on my phone. Yep, I was at the right place at the right time. Maybe the property manager had come by to warm it up before I arrived? That would be nice. I grabbed my duffel bag and groceries from the truck and headed up the steps to the wooden porch. The key was in the lockbox exactly where they said it would be. I let myself in, and the warmth hit me immediately. The fireplace was definitely going strong. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. The layout was simple. Main room with a kitchenette and fireplace, bathroom off to one side, and a small bedroom in the back. Everything looked cozy enough, but something felt off. That's when I noticed the dishes in the sink. Just a plate and a coffee mug, but definitely used. A half-empty water glass sat on the coffee table. I checked the bedroom and found the sheets on the bed rumpled. The blanket pulled back like someone had just gotten up. When I put my hand on the mattress, it was still warm. My heart started racing. I checked the bathroom, damp towel hanging over the shower rod, toothpaste residue in the sink. Someone had definitely been here, and recently. I immediately called the rental company. "Mount Hood Getaways, this is Jennifer." "Hi, I just checked into the Pine Creek cabin, and it looks like someone's been staying here. There are dirty dishes and the bed's been slept in. The fireplace is even lit." "Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Let me check our system." I heard keyboard clicking. "That's strange. You're our only booking for that property this week. The cleaner was supposed to be there yesterday." "Well, somebody has definitely been here today. The bed is still warm." She was quiet for a moment. "Sir, are you certain nobody else is in the cabin right now?" That thought hadn't even occurred to me. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow outside. I don't think so," I called out when I came in. "I'd recommend checking all the rooms thoroughly," she said. "I'll stay on the line." I did a quick search of the small cabin, looking in the closets and under the bed. There wasn't much furniture to hide behind. The cabin didn't have an attic that I could see, just a peaked roof. There was a crawl space access in the bedroom closet, but it was secured with a padlock. "I don't see anyone," I told her, "but someone was definitely here. This is concerning. We've had issues with squatters in some of our more remote properties. I can offer you a full refund and book you somewhere else if you'd prefer not to stay." I considered it, but the snow was coming down harder now, and the drive back to Portland would be treacherous after dark. Plus, I'd already unloaded my stuff. "No, it's fine. Just wanted to make sure I'm not being charged for someone else's stay as well." Absolutely not. And again, I apologize for the condition of the cabin. I'll make a note for the owner. After hanging up, I washed the dishes in the sink and stripped the bed, remaking it with fresh sheets I found in the closet. I tried to shake off my uneasiness, probably just some local who knew the cabin was usually empty. They'd seen my truck and taken off. I unpacked my groceries, made a simple dinner, and poured myself a generous whiskey. The fireplace was nice, might as well enjoy it since it was already going. I settled in with my book, trying to relax. The snow continued falling heavily. By nightfall, there must have been at least 6 inches on the ground, and more coming down. The wind had picked up too, howling around the eaves. I poured another whiskey and tried to focus on my book, but kept finding myself staring out the windows into the darkness. Around 11, I decided to turn in. I double-checked all the doors and windows, locked tight. I added another log to the fire, banked it for the night, and headed to the bedroom. Despite my exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. The cabin made unfamiliar sounds, creaking and settling. The wind rattled something outside. I finally drifted off around midnight. I'm not sure what woke me. A noise? A feeling? My watch said 3:17 a.m. when I opened my eyes, instantly alert. I held my breath, listening. Creak. It came from the main room, a floorboard, like someone had stepped on it. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. Another creak, then a soft thud. Not the wind, not the house settling. Someone was in the cabin. My phone was charging on the nightstand. I reached for it as quietly as possible, ready to call 911. But what would I tell them? My location was remote, and in this snowstorm, help would take forever to arrive. I slid out of bed and grabbed the only weapon-like object in reach, a heavy metal flashlight. Heart pounding, I crept to the bedroom door, which I'd left partially open. Another creak. Closer now. I raised the flashlight and stepped into the doorway, flicking on the light. The main room was empty. The fire had died down to embers, casting a dim red glow. Nothing seemed disturbed. I checked the front door, still locked. Same with the back door and all the windows. I must have imagined it. Or maybe it was just the cabin settling after all. I used the bathroom, added another log to the fire, and went back to bed. This time, I closed the bedroom door completely. Eventually, I fell into an uneasy sleep. Morning came with bright sunlight reflecting off the snow. I'd slept later than intended, almost 9 a.m. The storm had passed, leaving behind at least a foot of pristine white powder. It was beautiful. I made coffee and tried to shake off my middle-of-the-night paranoia. In daylight, the cabin seemed perfectly normal, just a simple vacation rental, nothing sinister about it. That's when I noticed the back door. Nothing seemed wrong with it at first glance. Still locked, just as I'd left it. But something made me look closer at the snow outside. There were footprints, a single set, leading from the back door into the woods. Fresh footprints that hadn't been filled in by the storm, which meant they'd been made after the snow stopped, sometime in the early morning hours. Someone had been in the cabin when I arrived. They'd hidden somewhere while I checked the rooms, and then, during the night, while I slept, they'd slipped out. My hands shook as I called the rental company again. This time, a man answered. Mount Hood Getaways. Hi, this is Ethan at the Pine Creek cabin. I called yesterday about signs someone had been here. Yes, I see the note. Jennifer mentioned possible squatters. Well, they were definitely here. There are footprints leading from the back door into the woods. They must have been hiding inside when I arrived and left during the night. He was quiet for a moment. Sir, I strongly recommend you pack up and leave the property immediately. We'll process a full refund. You think they might come back? These remote cabins are vulnerable. We've had problems with transients, especially in winter. Some of them get territorial. Please, for your safety, we'd prefer you didn't stay another night. I already paid for 2 nights. The roads are clear now, but they might not be later. I don't want to drive back to Portland only to find the highway closed. He sighed. If you insist on staying, please use the manual deadbolts on all doors and windows. They're the old iron sliding locks that can't be opened from outside. The previous owner installed them after a break-in years ago. I hadn't noticed those. I will. Thanks. And call the police if you see anyone hanging around. After hanging up, I went around the cabin, finding and engaging all the heavy iron deadbolts he'd mentioned. They were serious, thick metal bars that slid into equally solid brackets. No one was getting through those without making enough noise to wake the dead. I spent the day alternating between reading by the fire and staring out the windows. I couldn't stop wondering who had been there and where they'd hidden. The cabin wasn't big, maybe 700 square feet total. There weren't many hiding places. Unless I went back to the bedroom closet and examined the padlocked crawl space access. The padlock looked old, but when I tugged on it, it held firm. Could someone have hidden down there anyway? Maybe they had a key to the lock? I also started noticing other things. A scuff mark on the wall that looked fresh. A chair that seemed slightly out of place from where it had been last night. Little things that could be my imagination, but might also indicate someone moving around while I slept. By mid-afternoon, I'd worked myself into such a state of paranoia that I seriously considered leaving, despite what I'd told the rental company. But my stubborn pride won out. I wasn't going to be scared away. I had the cabin locked down tight now. One more night, then I'd head home in the morning. I cooked an early dinner, kept my whiskey to a minimum, and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The temperature dropped quickly, and I built up the fire again. No way was I going to let it die out tonight. Every sound made me jump. The crack of the fire, the wind in the trees, the occasional chunk of snow sliding off the roof. I kept the flashlight next to me on the couch, along with my phone and a kitchen knife I'd placed on the coffee table. Around 10 p.m., I did a final check of all the locks, then barricaded the back door with a chair wedged under the handle for good measure. I left lights on in the main room and bathroom, then retreated to the bedroom, closing and locking that door as well. Sleep was impossible. I lay there, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Every creak, every gust of wind, every tick of the cabin settling had me sitting upright, straining to listen. Where had they been hiding? That question kept circling in my mind. The crawl space seemed most likely, but the padlock appeared secure. Was there some other space I hadn't noticed? Some hidden compartment or false wall? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that they must have been moving around the cabin while I was there, always just out of sight. Around 2 a.m., something hit one of the windows. Probably just a clump of snow falling from a branch, but it nearly gave me a heart attack. I got up and checked every room again, confirming all locks were still engaged. Nothing had changed. I was definitely alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I made it through the night without incident, though I barely slept. As soon as daylight came, I packed my stuff, did a quick clean-up, and got out of there. I didn't even bother with breakfast. I just wanted to be gone. The drive back to Portland was beautiful. Blue skies, snow-covered trees, barely any traffic. It should have been relaxing. Instead, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. It's been 3 weeks, and I still haven't recovered. I don't think the person in the cabin meant to harm me. They could have done that easily while I slept. They just wanted shelter. But the thought that someone was there, watching me, hiding somewhere in that small space, it's messed with my head. I've become obsessive about checking locked doors and looking in closets before I can relax. My own apartment doesn't feel safe anymore. I keep waking up at night convinced I heard something. The rental company refunded my money in full and even offered a free stay at one of their other properties, which I declined. I reached out again to ask if they'd investigated the cabin, and they said they had sent someone to check it out. According to them, there was no evidence of anyone living there, no personal belongings, no sign of the crawl space being used. They suggested the footprints might have been from a maintenance person checking on the property after the storm. Maybe that's true. Maybe there's a logical explanation for everything I experienced. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know I'm never staying in a remote cabin again. I've been into landscape photography for about 9 years now, carrying my camera to every remote place I could find. I've always been drawn to dramatic weather. Those moments when nature shows its raw power make for the most incredible shots. But what happened to me last January in Taos has changed how I approach my passion forever. I'd been planning this trip to New Mexico for months. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains had been on my bucket list forever. Something about the way the light hits them during winter storms creates this ethereal quality that I'd seen in other photographers' work, but wanted to capture myself. I'd been tracking this particular storm system for days, watching as it built up over Arizona and headed eastward. When I arrived in Taos, the locals at my hotel were already talking about the incoming snowstorm. The lady at the front desk actually raised her eyebrows when I told her my plans. "You might want to reconsider heading up there today," she said while handing me my room key. "Weather Service is saying this one's going to be a doozy. Roads up there aren't maintained like the highways." I thanked her for the concern but brushed it off. I'd driven in snow plenty of times back home in Colorado, and my sedan had never let me down before. Plus, I had a tight schedule. I was only in town for 3 days, and this storm was the whole reason I came. I couldn't just sit in my hotel room while perfect shooting conditions passed me by. So I packed up my gear, my Canon with a couple of lenses, tripod, extra batteries, since the cold drains them so fast, and some basic supplies. I always keep emergency stuff in my trunk anyway. A thick blanket, some protein bars, a flashlight, one of those emergency Mylar blankets, and a small gas can. Basic stuff for someone who does a lot of solo trips, nothing special. The storm wasn't supposed to hit full force until evening, which gave me time to scout locations. I found this perfect back road that snaked along the eastern edge of the mountains, with these incredible vistas overlooking the valley. There were hardly any guardrails, but the views were absolutely worth it. I spent a couple hours taking test shots, getting a feel for the light, watching the heavy clouds roll in faster than predicted. I should have turned back when the first heavy flakes started falling around 3 p.m. The weather alert buzzed on my phone, upgrading the storm warning. But I only had 1 bar of service and was too fixated on the incredible shots I was getting. The clouds were this deep purple gray, hanging low over the mountains, with occasional lightning flashing inside them. The kind of dramatic scene that makes other photographers jealous. By 4:30, the snow was coming down hard, visibility dropping by the minute. I finally decided to head back to town, but I'd gone further along that mountain road than I realized. The snowfall was accumulating fast, already a couple inches on the ground, and my sedan's tires weren't exactly snow-rated. I was taking it slow, maybe 15 km/h, hands gripping the wheel tight. That's when it happened. Coming around a bend, my back tires just lost contact. 1 second I had control, the next I was sliding toward the edge of the road. I turned into the skid like you're supposed to, but there was zero traction. My heart jumped into my throat as the car drifted sideways, then slammed into a snowbank on the mountainside of the road. The impact wasn't bad, but I was stuck, really stuck. When I tried to reverse, my tires just spun uselessly, digging themselves deeper. I sat there for a minute, breathing hard, looking at the snow coming down outside my windshield. I tried my phone, no service at all now. Great. I checked the time. 5:12 p.m., already getting dark because of the storm and mountain shadows. I did a mental inventory of my situation. I had about half a tank of gas, which meant I could run the heater intermittently through the night if necessary. I had water, some protein bars, and those emergency supplies. I wasn't in immediate danger, just inconvenienced. I figured I'd wait a couple hours to see if the snow let up, or if maybe a plow would come through. Worst case, I'd spend an uncomfortable night and flag someone down in the morning. So I settled in, turned off the engine to conserve gas, wrapped myself in my blanket, and actually reviewed some of the photos I'd taken. They were incredible, almost worth the predicament I was in. Almost. Every 30 minutes, I'd start the car, run the heater for about 10 minutes, then shut it off again. The snow continued relentlessly, piling up on my hood and roof. The silence was profound, that muffled quiet that only comes with heavy snowfall, where you can almost hear the flakes landing. Around 7 p.m., after I'd been stuck for nearly 2 hours, I saw headlights cutting through the snow behind me. The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming. I switched on my hazards and interior light so they could see I was inside, and watched as a dark pickup truck slowly pulled up about 20 feet behind me. The truck sat there for a minute with its high beams on, half blinding me and my mirrors. Then the driver's door opened, and a figure got out. Through my rearview mirror, I could make out a man in a thick dark jacket and a beanie pulled low. He was tall, broad-shouldered, walking with a deliberate slowness through the deep snow toward my car. I rolled my window down a crack as he approached. The blast of cold air was shocking. "You all right in there?" he called out, still about 10 feet from my car. His voice was deep, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Not quite local, not quite southern. "Yeah, just stuck," I responded, trying to sound casual. "Slid on some ice, waiting for the storm to pass or for morning." He moved closer until he was standing right outside my driver's side window. I still couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness and swirling snow, just the outline of a beard and the fog of his breath. That could be a long wait. Storm's supposed to dump 2 feet before morning. I can give you a ride into town if you want. Something felt off immediately. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what triggered my internal alarm, but something in his tone just didn't match the helpful words. He wasn't asking questions a normal person would ask, like where I was from or if I'd called for help. He was just waiting for me to accept his offer. "Thanks, but I think I'm good," I said. "Got supplies, gonna wait it out. Appreciate you stopping, though." He didn't respond right away, just stood there, staring at me through the crack in the window. Then he started walking around my car, running his gloved hand along the hood as he passed in front of my headlights. "Nice camera equipment you got in that back seat," he commented as he circled to the passenger side. "Looks expensive." My stomach tightened. I hadn't mentioned photography, and my camera bag was in the back seat, barely visible in the dark. "Look," he said, returning to my window. "It's gonna get dangerously cold tonight. Below zero with the wind chill. Car like this, you'll run out of gas before morning trying to stay warm." I'm just trying to help." His tone had shifted, more insistent now, almost irritated that I wasn't accepting his offer. He leaned down closer to the window crack, and I caught a whiff of cigarettes and something else I couldn't identify. "No thanks, really," I said firmly. "I've got plenty of gas and emergency gear. I appreciate you checking, but I'm all set." He straightened up, standing there silently for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then he slapped my roof twice with his open palm. "Suit yourself," he said flatly, then turned and walked back to his truck. I expected him to drive away. He didn't. The truck just sat there, engine running, high beams still aimed at my car. 10 minutes passed. 20. He wasn't leaving. Occasionally he'd rev the engine, not like someone trying to keep a vehicle running in the cold, but deliberate, sustained revs that seemed meant to remind me he was still there. My skin crawled every time. I turned off all my lights and slouched down in my seat, pretending to be asleep. In reality, I was wide awake, heart pounding, watching his truck in my side mirror. I didn't dare start my engine again for heat, worried it might provoke him somehow. For hours he sat there. Sometimes the silhouette in the truck would shift or light a cigarette, the tiny orange glow visible through his windshield. I kept thinking about those stories you hear about people being robbed or worse on desolate roads. What kind of person sits for hours behind a stranded motorist who's declined help? The temperature dropped severely. My breath fogged inside the car, and eventually frost started forming on the inside of my windows. I was shivering under my blanket, but too terrified to start the engine. I kept my pocket knife clutched in my hand, knowing it would be useless if he actually decided to approach again. Around 2 a.m., I heard his engine rev higher than before. Then his headlights swept across the snow as he executed a 3-point turn on the narrow road. I held my breath, not moving, as he drove past my car, heading back the way he'd come. I watched his taillights disappear into the storm, still not daring to move for at least another 30 minutes in case he was just pulling a trick. When I finally started my car again, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I cranked the heat, feeling the pins and needles of warmth returning to my frozen fingers and toes. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound, the wind, snow sliding off tree branches, the normal creaks of a cooling engine, made me jerk upright, certain he had returned. By dawn, the snowfall had eased to occasional flurries. The world outside was transformed, everything buried under at least 18 inches of pristine white. I started digging around my tires with my collapsible shovel, working feverishly despite my exhaustion. It took almost 2 hours of digging, putting my floor mats under the tires for traction and careful acceleration, but I finally freed my car. I've never felt such relief as when my tires finally caught and I was moving again. The drive back to Taos was nerve-wracking. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see that truck appear behind me again. Every vehicle I passed sent a jolt of panic through me. At a diner in town, while warming up with the strongest coffee they had, I casually mentioned my encounter to the waitress. Her expression changed immediately. "What kind of truck was it?" she asked, setting down the coffee pot. "Dark blue or black Ford, older model. Couldn't see the plates." She lowered her voice. "You're the third person this winter to mention something like this. Guy in a dark pickup stopping to help stranded drivers up in the mountains. Police say they've had reports of someone targeting cars stuck in snowstorms, but they've never caught him." "Targeting them for what?" I asked, though I already had my suspicions. She shrugged. "Nobody knows for sure. The other 2 people drove off with him and were never seen again. Their cars were found abandoned, though." I don't know if she was exaggerating or confusing stories, but I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. The look in that man's eyes when I refused his help. I know what a predator looks like now. I still do photography, still chase storms for that perfect shot, but everything has changed. I sold my sedan and bought a proper 4x4 with off-road tires. My emergency kit now includes a satellite phone, bear spray, a more serious weapon I'm trained to use, and enough supplies to survive for days. I never venture out without telling multiple people exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. And I never ever stop for strangers on remote roads, not to help them, and certainly not to accept their help. Some dangers don't announce themselves until they're standing right outside your window, and by then, it might already be too late. I still get chills thinking about what happened that winter night in 2009. I've never really told anyone the full story because honestly, who would believe me? But it's been eating at me for years, and I need to get this off my chest. I was 14 at the time, a scrawny 8th grader on the junior high wrestling team in our small Oregon town. Nothing special about me, just another kid trying to find his place. That year, I'd somehow managed to qualify for the state championships, which was a big deal for me and my family. My dad had wrestled in high school, too. Never made it to state, though, so he was over the moon proud. The tournament was being held on the other side of the Cascades that year, about a 4-hour drive from our town. Coach Miller had rented this ancient school bus that smelled like sweaty gym socks and had these vinyl seats that stuck to your legs. There were 12 of us who'd qualified, plus Coach and his assistant, Mr. Banks. The tournament itself went okay. I placed 4th in my weight class, which was better than I'd expected. Some of the other guys did great. Nick Castillo won his division, and Tyler made it to finals. We were all riding pretty high on the trip home, despite being exhausted and sore as hell. We left around 6 p.m., and everything was normal at first. We stopped at a McDonald's about an hour into the trip, and I remember calling my mom on my flip phone to tell her how I'd done. The forecast had mentioned a chance of snow, but nobody seemed worried about it. Then, around 8 p.m., while we were on Highway 97 heading north, the weather turned nasty. I mean, it went from a few gentle flakes to a full-on whiteout in like 20 minutes. I'd never seen snow come down so fast. It was hypnotic watching it in the headlights, these thick, heavy flakes swirling around like they were alive. Coach Miller was driving cautiously, but visibility kept getting worse. The bus was this old piece of junk that didn't even have proper defroster, so he kept having to wipe the windshield with his sleeve. Through the windows, I couldn't see anything but swirling white. The road had completely disappeared. "All right, boys," Coach finally announced. "I need to pull over until this lets up. Can't see a damn thing." He eased the bus onto what I guess was the shoulder of the highway. The engine stayed running for the heat, but we were stuck there, in the middle of nowhere, with a blizzard raging around us. After about 30 minutes of waiting, guys started getting restless. The bus had a tiny bathroom in the back, but Tyler said it was nasty as hell and refused to use it. A few guys were complaining they needed to pee, and Coach finally relented. "Fine. Everyone who needs to go can step out, but stay within sight of the bus. Do your business and get right back in, and for God's sake, don't wander off." I didn't really need to go, but after watching half the team file out, I felt like I might as well. Plus, I was getting stiff sitting in that seat for so long. Stepping off the bus was like entering another world. The wind hit me first, this biting, fierce cold that stung my face and made my eyes water instantly. The snow was coming down so thick I could barely see 5 feet in front of me. The bus's headlights created this eerie glow in the swirling snow. Most of the guys just went right next to the bus, but I've always been weird about privacy. I decided to walk a little further away, just past the reach of the headlights where the shadows began. I trudged through snow that was already up to my knees in some spots. I found a spot about 20 yards from the bus where I figured no one could see me. The snow muffled everything. It was weirdly quiet, except for the distant rumble of the bus engine and the soft hiss of snow falling. I did my business quickly because my fingers were already going numb despite my gloves. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind. This faint sound, almost like someone calling out. I zipped up and was about to head back when I heard it more clearly. "Where is everyone?" The voice was soft, distant, but unmistakably human. It sounded lost, confused, maybe even a little scared. I peered into the darkness beyond where I stood, squinting against the falling snow. "Hello?" I called out, my breath clouding in front of my face. No response, just the endless falling snow. I took a few steps forward, away from the bus, thinking maybe someone else had walked too far and gotten turned around. "Is someone there?" I called again. "Where is everyone?" The voice came again, clearer this time. It didn't sound like any of my teammates. It was higher pitched, almost childlike, but not quite. And it seemed to be coming from the edge of the woods that lined the highway. I should have gone back to the bus right then. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind, telling me to turn around. But instead, I took another step forward, and another, my sneakers crunching through the deepening snow. As I got further from the bus, the snow seemed to get deeper, much faster than it should have. Suddenly it was up to my thighs, making each step a struggle. The wind whipped around me, but strangely, I couldn't hear the bus engine anymore, just the wind and that voice calling out. And then I saw it. About 30 feet ahead of me, at what must have been the tree line, there was a faint bluish glow. At first, I thought maybe it was moonlight reflecting off the snow, but the sky was completely overcast. As I stared, the glow took shape. A vague human outline, like someone standing there, but not quite solid. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to turn around and run back to the bus. But something weird happened. I wasn't scared. Instead, this strange calm washed over me, like when you're half asleep and nothing seems quite real. I felt peaceful, curious. The figure raised what looked like an arm, beckoning to me. "Don't leave me," it said, the voice somehow carrying perfectly through the howling wind. I noticed something odd. The snow seemed to be swirling outward from the figure, as if it was the source of the storm itself. Little eddies and spirals of snowflakes danced around it, creating patterns that were almost hypnotic to watch. "Who are you?" I called out, taking another laborious step forward through the deep snow. The figure didn't answer my question. It just repeated, "Don't leave me," in that same haunting, not quite human voice. With each step I took toward it, the figure seemed to float backward, maintaining the exact same distance between us. Yet it kept beckoning, kept calling, and I kept following. My legs were numb from the cold, my jeans soaked through, but I barely noticed. All I could focus on was reaching that glowing blue figure. I don't know how far I'd gone, maybe another 30 feet into what must have been the forest, though I couldn't really see the trees through the snow, when I felt a heavy hand clamp down on my shoulder. The shock of it broke whatever trance I was in. I spun around, nearly losing my balance in the deep snow, to find Coach Miller standing there, his face red from the cold, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. "Wrong way. The bus is back this way," he said, his voice gruff. He didn't wait for me to respond, just grabbed my arm firmly and started pulling me back the way I'd come. I looked back over my shoulder, trying to spot the blue figure again, but there was nothing there, just swirling snow and darkness. "What the hell were you thinking, Marcus?" Coach demanded as he half-dragged me through the snow. "You were heading straight into the woods. Another few minutes, and we might not have found you at all." I tried to explain about the voice, about the figure I'd seen, but the words sounded ridiculous even as I said them. Coach just shook his head, clearly thinking I was making excuses. "Hypothermia makes people do crazy things," he muttered. "Makes them see things that aren't there." But I hadn't felt cold. Not until that moment, anyway, when his words seemed to break some kind of spell, and suddenly I realized my legs were burning with cold, my hands numb, my whole body shivering violently. The bus came back into view, its headlights cutting through the snow like beacons. I could make out the shadowy figures of my teammates, some already climbing back aboard, others waiting anxiously by the door. Nick spotted us first. "There they are," he shouted, pointing in our direction. As we approached, I could see the relief on everyone's faces. Nick slapped me on the back as I climbed onto the bus. "Damn, Marcus, we thought we might have a casualty," he said, only half joking. "Coach was freaking out when he couldn't find you." I collapsed into my seat, suddenly exhausted. My pants were soaked through from the snow, and I was shivering uncontrollably. Someone, I think it was Tyler, tossed me a blanket from his gym bag. Coach Miller stood at the front of the bus, looking more shaken than I'd ever seen him. He took a clipboard from Mr. Banks and began calling out names, carefully checking off each wrestler as they responded. When he was satisfied everyone was accounted for, he returned to the driver's seat and we continued our journey, creeping along at maybe 20 miles per hour through the blinding snow. The storm began to ease about an hour later, and by the time we made it back to our town, there was only a light dusting of snow falling. My dad was waiting in the school parking lot, and I've never been so glad to see his beat-up old Ford pickup. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen that night. Not my parents, not my friends. Who would believe me? I convinced myself it must have been exhaustion, or like Coach said, the beginning stages of hypothermia playing tricks on my mind. But I couldn't shake the memory of that glowing blue figure, or the strange, peaceful feeling that had come over me as I followed it deeper into the woods. It felt too real to be just my imagination. Years later, during my freshman year of college, I stumbled across an article online about strange phenomena reported in snowstorms. The author described something called a frost phantom, an entity that supposedly appears during blizzards and lures people away from safety deeper into the storm where they eventually freeze to death. The descriptions matched exactly what I'd experienced. The blue glow, the beckoning figure, the unnatural calm that overcomes the victim. I've spent hours researching since then, finding similar accounts scattered throughout history. People who wandered away from their hiking groups in snowstorms, claiming they were following someone. Lone travelers found frozen to death miles from the road, with no logical explanation for why they'd left their vehicles. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Coach hadn't come looking for me that night. Would I have kept following that glowing figure until I collapsed from exhaustion and cold? Would they have found my body in the spring thaw, just another mysterious death blamed on poor judgment during a storm? I still wrestle, made it onto my college team even, but I've never gone back to Highway 97 in winter. I've never told this story to anyone before today. Part of me still questions if what I saw was real or just some hallucination brought on by the cold and exhaustion. But another part of me knows, with absolute certainty, that something was out there in that blizzard, calling to me. Something that wanted me to follow it into the darkness. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the snow is falling heavily outside my window, I swear I can still hear that voice, faint but clear, asking the same question over and over. Where is everyone? I still can't sleep properly at night. It's been almost 10 years, but every time I close my eyes, I see that hand, fingers curled up like it was clutching something invisible, the skin all dried up and leathery. I've tried therapy, meditation, even medication, but nothing seems to help. I figured maybe writing about it might help me process what happened that summer day in 2014. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not crazy. I was 21 back then, halfway through my biology degree at State, desperate for cash like most college students. My dad taught me basic handyman skills growing up, so I advertised my services on community boards around town to make ends meet. Most jobs were simple: fixing leaky faucets, patching drywall, the occasional deck repair. Nothing prepared me for what happened at the Miller house. The call came on a scorching July morning. An elderly woman named Pamela Miller introduced herself, explaining that she and her husband Richard had recently purchased an old house on Oakwood Drive. It was built during the Great Depression. One of those modest single-story homes with character but plenty of issues. She mentioned they needed someone to check beneath the house for, well, she hesitated before saying it, buried treasure. I almost laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Pamela insisted their neighbor, Charles Whitaker, had told them the original owner hid valuable coins under the floorboards during the Depression. Charles had lived in the neighborhood his entire life and knew the original owner personally. Richard was skeptical but curious enough to want someone to check it out. The pay was good, $200 for what seemed like a strange but easy job. Plus, I had a metal detector my uncle gave me for Christmas that I barely used. Treasure hunting sounded more interesting than painting someone's garage in July heat. I arrived at their place around noon the next day. The house looked exactly how you'd imagine. Weathered clapboard siding with peeling white paint, a slightly sagging front porch, and overgrown rose bushes that had seen better days. Pamela greeted me at the door. She must have been in her mid-70s, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and those oversized glasses that magnified her eyes. Richard stood behind her, tall and thin with suspicion written all over his face. I could tell immediately he thought this treasure hunt was nonsense. "The access to the crawl space is around back," Richard said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Charles claims the coins are likely somewhere near the center of the house, under the living room." I nodded, trying to appear professional despite the absurdity of the situation. "I'll be thorough, sir. If there's anything down there, I'll find it." The crawl space entrance was a small hatch barely big enough for me to squeeze through. I shined my flashlight inside and immediately regretted taking the job. The space couldn't have been more than 2 feet high at its tallest point, meaning I'd be army crawling the entire time. Spider webs decorated every corner, and the musty smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. I geared up with knee pads, gloves, and a headlamp. My metal detector wasn't anything fancy, but it would detect metal a few inches deep in soil. I slid into the crawl space on my stomach, dragging my tool bag behind me. The temperature dropped immediately underneath the house, but it was still uncomfortably humid. Dust particles floated in my headlamp beam as I inched my way forward. The The ground beneath me was mostly hard-packed dirt with occasional patches of concrete. Plumbing pipes and electrical wiring hung overhead, forcing me to navigate carefully. For the first hour, I methodically swept the metal detector back and forth, finding nothing but old nails, bits of wire, and what looked like fragments of a broken pipe. Richard checked on me twice, clearly growing impatient. "Found your millions yet?" he called down sarcastically during his second check-in. "Just some rusty nails and broken glass so far," I replied, my voice echoing in the confined space. "I'm making my way toward the center now." The further I crawled, the more claustrophobic it felt. I had to constantly remind myself to breathe normally. I'd never been diagnosed with claustrophobia, but being trapped in that tight, dark space with dirt and cobwebs everywhere was testing my limits. Then, somewhere beneath what I guessed was the living room, my detector gave off a strong signal. I swept it back and forth to pinpoint the location, then set it aside and pulled a small garden trowel from my tool belt. The dirt was surprisingly soft here, unlike the compacted soil elsewhere. As I dug, my fingers brushed against something smooth and hard, glass. I carefully excavated around it, revealing what looked like an old pickle jar, about the size of a quart mason jar, but with a different shape. The glass was cloudy with age, and the metal lid was so rusted I couldn't make out any labeling. Something was definitely inside, but the dirty glass made it impossible to see clearly. My heart raced. Could it actually be coins? I'd assumed this whole treasure hunt was just an old man's tale. But here I was, holding what could be a genuine Depression-era stash. I secured the jar in my bag and continued searching the area, but found nothing else significant. By the time I emerged from the crawl space, I was filthy, sweaty, and itching all over from dust and who knows what else. But I was also excited. Pamela and Richard were waiting in the backyard, Richard looking impatient and Pamela hopeful. "I found something," I said, pulling out the jar. Their eyes widened simultaneously. Richard reached for it, turning it over in his hands. "It's sealed tight," he muttered, examining the rusted lid. We moved to their kitchen table. Richard tried unsuccessfully to open the jar with his bare hands, then with a dish towel for better grip. Finally, he retrieved a pair of pliers from a drawer. With considerable effort, the lid gave way with a sharp pop. None of us were prepared for what tumbled out. It wasn't coins. It wasn't jewelry or paper money or anything valuable. It was a human hand. The severed hand fell onto the kitchen table with a dull thud. It was perfectly preserved, desiccated and leathery like a mummy's, with long, slender fingers curled into a claw. The cut at the wrist was clean, professional almost. I could clearly see tendons and the ends of bones protruding from the dried tissue. Pamela screamed and stumbled backward. Richard jumped up from his chair, knocking it over. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the thing on their kitchen table. "What the hell is this?" Richard roared, his face reddening. He pointed an accusing finger at me. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" I finally snapped out of my shock. "No, I swear I just found it under the house exactly like this." "Richard, he wouldn't do this," Pamela said, her voice shaking. She'd moved to the far side of the kitchen, but hadn't fled the room entirely. "Why would he?" "To scare a couple of old folks," Richard spat. "Or maybe he's disturbed. Either way, I'm calling the police." "Please," I pleaded. "I had no idea what was in that jar. I was just doing the job you hired me for." We were interrupted by a knock at the back door. Charles Whitaker stood there, peering through the window with curious eyes. He must have been in his late 80s, with a weathered face and a slight hunch. Pamela let him in, quickly explaining what happened. Charles approached the table slowly, adjusting his thick glasses. He didn't seem nearly as shocked as the rest of us. He examined the hand without touching it, then sighed heavily. "I was afraid something like this might turn up," he said cryptically. "I should have told you the whole story before sending the boy under there." We gathered in the living room, directly above where I'd found the jar. Richard had wrapped the hand in a kitchen towel and placed it back in the jar, which now sat on the coffee table. No one wanted to touch it, but no one could stop staring at it either. Charles settled into an armchair and began his story. The original owner of this house was Marvin Caldwell. We called him Marv. Built it himself in 1932. He was an odd fellow, kept to himself mostly. Worked as a taxidermist for the Natural History Museum in the city. Very skilled with preserving things. My stomach tightened as the implication became clear. Marv was paranoid about banks after the crash of '29. Lost everything he had. So when he started making money again, he didn't trust banks. Rumor was he buried silver dollars and gold coins under the house. Charles paused, glancing at the jar. In 38 or 39, some men came looking for those coins. There was a confrontation. Marv lost his right hand in the fight. I looked at the jar involuntarily. The hand inside was a right hand. After that, Marv became even more reclusive. The story goes that he preserved his own severed hand as a reminder and as a warning to anyone who might come looking for his treasure again. He supposedly buried it with some of his coins as a kind of curse. The room fell silent. Richard was the first to speak. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe so," Charles replied, "but that's the story that's been told in this neighborhood for decades." I couldn't stop thinking about the biology and preservation aspects. If this was really from the 1930s and it's been preserved properly, it could look exactly like this, I said quietly, especially in a sealed container buried in cool, dry soil. Pamela shuddered. "What should we do with it?" "Call the police," Richard insisted. "This could be evidence of a crime." After much discussion, that's exactly what we did. 2 officers arrived, documented everything, and took the jar with them. They seemed skeptical of Charles's story, but took our statements anyway. I was questioned extensively about exactly where and how I found the jar. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that hand, its fingers curled like it was trying to grasp something even in death. I started researching Marvin Caldwell online, curious about Charles's story. What I found didn't match up. According to an obituary from 1962, Marvin Caldwell, a retired taxidermist, had died at the age of 78 from heart failure. The accompanying photo showed him with both hands intact, posing next to a mounted deer. There was no mention of any injury or disability. The next day, I managed to track down Marv's daughter, Stacy, now in her 80s and living in a retirement community across town. I called her, introduced myself, and hesitantly asked about her father's hands. "His hands," she repeated, confused. What an odd question. His hands were fine. He was a taxidermist. He needed both hands for his work. He never lost one in a confrontation, maybe in the late 1930s? "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "Who told you such a thing?" I mentioned Charles Whitaker. There was a long pause. "Charles Whitaker," she finally said, her voice suddenly cold. "That man has been spreading stories about my father for years. He's been trying to buy our old house for decades, scaring off potential buyers with his tales." This new information sent my mind spinning. If Marv never lost a hand, then whose hand had I found? And why would Charles lie about it? I decided to confront Charles directly. I found him at the local hardware store the next morning. examining garden tools with intense concentration. "The hand didn't belong to Marvin Caldwell," I said without preamble. Charles didn't seem surprised to see me. He carefully set down the pruning shears he'd been inspecting and turned to face me. "No," he admitted after a moment. "It didn't." "Then whose was it? And why did you lie?" Charles glanced around to ensure no one was listening, then guided me to a quiet corner of the store. "It belonged to my father, Clarence," he said quietly. "He was one of the men who went looking for Marv's treasure in 1939. I felt a chill despite the summer heat. "What happened?" "Marv caught him digging under the house. Instead of calling the police, he—" Charles swallowed hard. "Marv was skilled with a knife from his taxidermy work. He took my father's hand as punishment and as a warning to others. Then he preserved it, just like he did with his animals." That's horrible," I stammered. "Why not go to the police?" "It was a different time," Charles said simply. "My father was trespassing, trying to steal, and Marv had friends in the local police. Instead, my father left town in shame, and I stayed with my grandparents. When I grew up, I became obsessed with that house, with what happened there. I didn't know whether to believe him. The story seemed too bizarre, too convenient, but the hand was real enough." "Did you know the hand was still there? Is that why you told the Millers about buried treasure?" Charles smiled sadly. "I suspected it might be. I wanted someone to find it, to confirm what happened to my father. But I couldn't be the one to look for it." The police investigation ultimately went nowhere. The hand was too deteriorated for fingerprinting, and without clear evidence of a crime beyond statutory limitations, the case was closed. The hand was eventually buried in the town cemetery in an unmarked grave. I tried to put the whole disturbing episode behind me. I finished college, moved away for a job, started building a life. But the mystery of that hand stayed with me. 5 years later, I received a newspaper clipping in the mail. Charles Whitaker had died at age 92. There was no return address on the envelope, just the obituary and a handwritten note. His real name wasn't Charles, and his father wasn't named Clarence. I've spent years trying to discover the truth. Who was Charles really? Whose hand did I find that day? Why the elaborate lies? I've hit nothing but dead ends. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the weight of that jar in my hands, the sound of the lid popping open, and those desiccated fingers curled into a claw as if still reaching for something long lost. And I know it was real, even if I'll never understand what really happened in that house on Oakwood Drive. I still get goosebumps when I think about what happened that day in March. It's been 8 months, but I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me through my bedroom window at night. My therapist says writing this down might help, so here goes. My name's Alex. I'm 15, and until last March, I lived with my parents and 5 siblings in this big old house in Harley's Cove. It's a small coastal town where nothing ever happens, or at least that's what I thought. The house was spacious enough for all of us. My parents, my older sister Emma, 17, my older brother Declan, 16, me, Violet, 13, and the twins, Jamie and Lily, 8. Oh, and our Irish terrier, Harley, who we'd had since I was 9. That Saturday started like any other. Mom and Dad had taken Emma to her dance competition in the next town over. They'd be gone until late evening, so Declan was technically in charge, though he mostly just played video games in his room with his headphones on. Around 2 p.m., Violet came into my room asking if we could take Harley for his walk. It was our usual thing, a loop around the neighborhood that took about 40 minutes. The twins were watching cartoons downstairs, and Declan was, as expected, locked in his gaming world. "We're taking Harley out," I yelled up to Declan. I heard a muffled "whatever" through his door. The twins barely looked up from their show as we grabbed Harley's leash from the hook by the front door. It was one of those early March days where winter was fighting to hang on. The sky was a dull gray, and the wind carried that damp chill that cuts right through your jacket. Harley didn't care, though. He was practically pulling my arm off as soon as we hit the sidewalk. Our neighborhood backed up against some woods, and our walking route took us along the edge of them before circling back through a more developed area. We'd done this walk hundreds of times. I knew every crack in the sidewalk, every mailbox, every house. About 25 minutes in, we were at the furthest point from home when my phone rang. It was Declan. I remember thinking it was weird because he never calls, he always texts. "What's up?" I answered. His voice was different, tense. "Alex, did you guys come back with Harley?" "No, we're still on our walk. Why?" There was this pause that made my stomach drop. "Because Harley's scratching at the front door. I can hear him whining to be let in." I laughed, but it came out nervous. "That's not possible. He's right here with us." I looked down to confirm, and sure enough, Harley was sniffing at a bush, totally oblivious. "I'm not kidding, Alex." Declan's voice got lower. "I can hear him scratching. It's been going on for like 5 minutes." "Maybe it's just the wind moving something on the porch," I suggested. But even as I said it, I felt this creeping unease. No, it's not the fucking wind. It sounds exactly like when Harley wants in. That specific scratching pattern he does. And he's whining. Violet was looking at me with wide eyes, mouthing, "What's wrong?" "Don't open the door," I said firmly. "We're heading back now. Just stay away from the door, okay? And keep an eye on the twins." "This isn't funny, Alex." Declan sounded genuinely scared now, which was rare for my usually unflappable brother. "I'm not joking. Harley is literally standing 3 feet from me right now. Whatever's at the door, it's not him." I hung up and grabbed Violet's arm. "We need to go home, now." "What's happening?" Her voice went high with panic. "Declan says something's scratching at our front door, something that sounds like Harley." Violet's face went pale. "But Harley's right here." "I know. That's why we need to go." We turned around and started walking fast, not quite running, but close. Harley seemed to pick up on our anxiety and stayed close to my leg instead of pulling ahead like usual. The walk back seemed to stretch forever, each familiar landmark now somehow sinister in the gray afternoon light. We were about 5 minutes from home when Harley suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His ears went up, and every muscle in his body tensed. Then he started growling. Not his usual, "there's a squirrel" growl, but something deep and primal that I'd never heard from him before. I followed his gaze and felt my blood freeze. About 30 yards ahead of us, sitting perfectly still on the sidewalk, was Harley. Not our Harley. He was right beside me, growling, but an identical dog, same rusty brown coat, same white patch on the chest, same size. It was just sitting there, facing away from us, completely motionless. "Alex," Violet whispered, her hand finding mine. "I see it," I managed to say. Our Harley's growl got louder, and he started backing up, pressing against my legs like he wanted to run, but was too scared to leave us. The thing ahead must have heard us, because it slowly turned its head, too slowly, like it was mechanical. When it fully faced us, I realized what was wrong. Its eyes. They weren't the warm, dark brown of our Harley's eyes. They were a bright, glowing honey color. Unnatural. Luminous even in the daylight. Those eyes locked with mine, and suddenly I couldn't move. It was like my mind went fuzzy around the edges. I felt a pressure behind my eyes and this weird buzzing in my ears. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe seconds, maybe minutes, but I was only vaguely aware of Violet tugging on my arm and our Harley barking frantically. Then Violet screamed right in my ear, and the spell broke. I blinked and stumbled backward. The thing, the not Harley, was standing now, still staring at us. And then it did something that will haunt me forever. It opened its mouth wider than any dog's mouth should be able to open and let out a sound that wasn't anything like a dog. It was like a woman screaming in pain, but with this underlying hiss like an angry cat, all layered together in this impossible way. The sound physically hurt my ears. "Run," I whispered to Violet, but I couldn't tear my eyes away as the thing took a step toward us. Its movement was wrong, too fluid, like it had more joints than it should. "Run!" I shouted this time, and we both turned and sprinted back the way we'd come, Harley racing ahead of us. I fumbled for my phone and called Declan. "Something's out here," I gasped as soon as he answered. "Something that looks like Harley. Don't open the front door. Get the twins and go out the back. Right now." "What the—" "Just do it!" I screamed into the phone. "Meet us at Mrs. Keller's house." I hung up and kept running. Violet was crying beside me, and I wasn't sure if the thing was following us because I was too terrified to look back. We cut through yards and jumped fences, taking a roundabout way to our elderly neighbor's house 3 doors down from ours. Mrs. Keller answered her door to find us sweaty, panting, and terrified on her porch. "Good heavens! What's the matter with you children?" she asked, but let us in immediately. "Can we come in, please?" "Our brother and the twins are coming too," I managed between breaths. We collapsed in her living room, and I kept looking out the window, scanning for the not Harley. Our Harley was under the coffee table, still trembling. A few minutes later, Declan showed up with the twins, looking confused and scared. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded once Mrs. Keller had taken the twins to her kitchen for cookies. I told him everything, my voice shaking. Violet nodded along, occasionally adding details I missed. "I heard it scratching," Declan said quietly when we finished. "It sounded exactly like Harley, the same pattern he always does, 3 quick scratches, then a pause, then 3 more, and the whining was spot on." We called the police, then our parents. The cops arrived first and listened to our story with obvious skepticism. One officer stayed with us while 2 others went to check our house. They came back, reporting nothing unusual except some deep scratch marks on the front door. "Probably a bear," the older officer suggested. "They're coming out of hibernation this time of year, getting bold looking for food." "It wasn't a bear," I insisted. "It looked exactly like our dog, and those eyes." The officer patted my shoulder in that patronizing way adults do when they think you're being hysterical. "Imagination can play tricks when you're scared, son." My parents arrived shortly after, frantic with worry. They listened more seriously than the police had, but I could tell they weren't fully buying it either. They thought maybe we'd seen a coyote or a stray dog that resembled Harley, and our fear had distorted the rest. But Declan backed us up about the scratching, and that night, none of us wanted to go home. We ended up getting 2 rooms at the Holiday Inn by the highway. The next day, Dad and Declan went to check on the house and said everything seemed normal. No strange dogs, no scratches that couldn't be explained by a raccoon or something similar. They brought back some clothes and essentials, and we stayed at the hotel for 3 more nights. When we finally went home, my parents installed a security system with cameras. They also took Harley to the vet to make sure he was microchipped and up to date on everything, as if that would somehow protect him from whatever had mimicked him. For 2 weeks, we jumped at every sound. Harley wouldn't go near the front door anymore and would growl at nothing sometimes, staring at empty corners of rooms. The twins had nightmares. Violet refused to walk anywhere alone. After a month of this, my parents put the house up for sale. We moved to an apartment in the city, about 40 miles away. They told everyone it was because Dad got a better job offer, but we all knew the real reason. The house sold quickly, too quickly, almost like something wanted new occupants. Sometimes I think about the family living there now and wonder if they've seen anything strange. I still have trouble sleeping. I check 3 times that my bedroom door is locked each night. Harley sleeps in my room now, and sometimes he still growls at nothing, staring intently at my window. When he does that, I pull the covers over my head like a little kid. I've researched similar experiences online but haven't found much. Some people talk about skinwalkers or doppelgangers, but nothing quite matches what we saw. The closest thing I found was something called the mimic in some obscure folklore forum. Entities that can take the form of something familiar to lure you in. The thing that haunts me most is wondering what would have happened if Declan had opened that door, or if we hadn't noticed the eyes were wrong. What if we had called out to it, thinking it was our Harley who had somehow gotten loose and beaten us home? I don't think it wanted to be our pet. I think it wanted to replace him, and maybe not just him. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I hear that awful screeching sound in my memory, and I wonder if it's still out there, if it's found something else to mimic, or if someday I'll look up and see someone I know, but with those honey-colored eyes, watching me. I still haven't told anyone outside my family about this. They wouldn't believe me anyway. But I know what I saw. I know the thing at our door wasn't Harley, and I know those eyes weren't anything natural or good. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just passing through. It had found us specifically. It had studied our dog enough to mimic him perfectly, which means it had been watching us for who knows how long before we ever noticed it. That's what keeps me up at night. I still can't sleep with the windows open. Not after what happened that summer in Red Hollow. It's been almost 20 years, but I can still smell that metallic scent when I close my eyes. I've never told the full story online before. My therapist thinks it might help to write it all down, but I'm not sure anything will make those memories fade. It was July 2005. Me, Lucas, Cody, and Michelle had just graduated high school in our little North Carolina town. We'd all gotten into different colleges, me to UNC, Cody to NC State, and Michelle to Virginia Tech. That summer was our last hurrah before we went our separate ways. We'd been inseparable since 7th grade. The weird kid with the journal, that was me. The class clown, Cody. And the girl who could outshoot and outhunt most of the guys, Michelle. We'd camped together dozens of times, usually at the official sites off the Blue Ridge Parkway. But for our last adventure, Cody convinced us to try Red Hollow, this unofficial spot he'd heard about from his older brother. It was technically on national forest land, but wasn't a designated campground, just a clearing about 2 miles off the main trail that most locals knew about, but park rangers pretended didn't exist. The hike-in wasn't bad. I remember sweating through my t-shirt and constantly adjusting my pack, while Cody walked ahead, his wild curly hair bouncing with each step, cracking jokes about bears and poison ivy. Michelle kept scanning the tree line like she always did, a habit from hunting with her dad since she was 10. She had this serious way of moving through the woods, always aware of everything around her. I was mostly focused on not tripping over roots, while trying to document our final expedition in my journal. We reached the clearing around 4 p.m. It was perfect. Flat ground for our tents, a pre-made fire pit ringed with stones, and tall pines creating a natural canopy overhead. The place didn't look like it had been used in a while. There were some old beer cans and a weathered hiking boot that Cody immediately turned into a puppet he named Horace. "Horace says this is prime real estate," he announced in a ridiculous, gravelly voice, making Michelle roll her eyes but laugh anyway. Setting up camp took about an hour. We had 2 tents, one for Michelle and one for Cody and me. We gathered firewood, filtered water from a nearby stream, and Michelle strung up our food in a tree away from the campsite. Basic stuff we'd done countless times. That first evening felt magical. The sunset filtered through the trees, painting everything in gold. We grilled hot dogs and corn on Cody's little portable camp stove. After dinner, we sat around the fire passing a flask of Jack Daniels that Cody had swiped from his dad's liquor cabinet. Not enough to get wasted, just enough to feel warm and nostalgic. The stars came out incredibly bright once it got dark. No light pollution out there. I remember pointing out constellations while Michelle told us about a full-ride scholarship she'd just been offered, but hadn't told her parents about yet. Cody talked about how he was terrified of his roommate assignment. Some guy from New Jersey who listed extreme sports as an interest. Normal stuff. The kind of conversations you have when you're 18 and the whole world is about to change. As the fire died down, Cody started telling ghost stories. He always did this when we camped, and they were usually just stupid urban legends or plots he stole from horror movies. But that night, he told us about the Wendigo. "My grandpa used to talk about it," he said, his face eerily lit from below by the embers. "It's this spirit that possesses humans who've committed cannibalism in the woods. The Cherokees around here have stories about it, but lots of tribes do. Once it takes over, you're not human anymore. You turn into this thing, like a walking corpse with antlers and skin stretched too tight, and you're always hungry." "That's not a Cherokee legend," Michelle interrupted. "That's Algonquian." Cody waved her off. "Whatever. The point is, these mountains have stories. My grandpa said there was an entire hunting party that disappeared near here in the 70s. They found their camp just like they left it, food still cooking, but all 6 men gone. They only ever found one body, and it was—" he paused dramatically, "partially eaten." Michelle threw a marshmallow at him. "You're full of shit." I remember Cody grinning. "Maybe, but these woods are old, man. Older than any of us, and they've got secrets." We stayed up until around 1 a.m. before crawling into our tents. I fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the chorus of cicadas and distant owls. I woke up first the next morning. When I unzipped the tent, I noticed this weird smell right away. Kind of metallic, like pennies or blood, but earthier. At first I thought maybe an animal had died nearby, or some hunter had field-dressed a deer close to our camp. It wasn't overwhelming, just there. I started the camp stove to make coffee, and eventually Cody emerged looking hungover despite barely drinking. Michelle came out of her tent already fully dressed and ready for the day, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. "You guys smell that?" I asked. Michelle nodded, wrinkling her nose. "Something dead, probably." Cody inhaled deeply, then made a dramatic gagging sound. "Smells like your mom's cooking, Lucas." We ate breakfast, instant oatmeal and camp coffee, while trying to ignore the smell. It seemed to get stronger as the morning went on. Not unbearable, just persistent and unsettling. Michelle suggested we move camp, but Cody had already planned our day. "My brother told me about this old cabin deeper in the hollow," he said, pouring more coffee. Some moonshiner's place from Prohibition or something. We should check it out." Michelle didn't look thrilled. "How far is it?" "Maybe a mile, mile and a half. It's not on any trail, but I've got the coordinates." I was on the fence. The smell was making me uneasy, but exploring an old cabin sounded like exactly the kind of thing we'd want to remember about our last summer together. "We can decide about moving camp after we see the cabin," I suggested. We packed day packs with water, snacks, and first aid supplies. I brought my camera, an old film Canon my dad had given me for graduation. Michelle grabbed her hunting knife out of habit, strapping it to her belt. Cody consulted his brother's hand-drawn map, then pointed toward a dense section of forest at the far end of the clearing. "Adventure awaits," he announced with his typical enthusiasm. The hike was tougher than expected. There was no trail, just Cody periodically checking his compass and the crude map. The forest got thicker as we went, with rhododendron and mountain laurel creating natural barriers we had to push through. That metallic smell seemed to follow us, sometimes fading and sometimes getting stronger. About an hour in, we noticed it had gotten really quiet. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to have died down. I mentioned it to the others. "Animals probably just sense us coming," Michelle said, but I could tell she was unsettled too. Cody had stopped making jokes, focusing instead on navigating. "Should be just past that ridge," he said, pointing to a small rise ahead. We climbed the gentle slope, and sure enough, on the other side was a small clearing with a dilapidated cabin in the center. It was smaller than I'd imagined, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a collapsed section of roof and a chimney that leaned precariously to one side. The logs were gray with age, covered in moss and fungi. "Told you it was real," Cody said, his voice quieter than usual. We approached cautiously. The door hung crooked on one rusted hinge, swinging slightly, though there wasn't any breeze. Inside, sunlight filtered through the holes in the roof, illuminating dust motes that swirled as we entered. The cabin was a single room with a stone fireplace, a broken table, and what might have once been a bed frame. Empty mason jars littered the floor, along with rusted tools and decayed fabric. The metallic smell was definitely stronger in here, almost coppery. "Check this out," Michelle called from near the fireplace. She was pointing at something carved into one of the stones, a circle with jagged lines radiating outward like a crude sun or star. It didn't look as old as the cabin. The cuts were cleaner, less weathered. "Probably some bored hikers," Cody said, but he wasn't smiling anymore. I took a photo of the symbol, the camera flash momentarily brightening the dim interior. That's when we heard it. A low, rattling growl from somewhere in the woods outside. Not a bear or a mountain lion. Not any animal I'd ever heard. Michelle grabbed my arm. "We should go. Now." "It's probably just—" Cody started, but another growl cut him off, closer this time. It sounded wrong, like something trying to imitate an animal sound, but not quite getting it right. We moved to the doorway. The forest looked different somehow, darker. The trees seemed to bend inward toward the cabin, though there was still no wind. And that smell. It was overwhelming now, metallic and rotten at the same time. "Back to camp," Michelle said firmly, her hand moving to the knife on her belt. We stepped outside and froze. About 50 yards away, partially hidden by a massive oak tree, was something. I still struggled to describe it accurately. It was tall, impossibly tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin, jointed in places where joints shouldn't be. Its body was emaciated, the skin gray and stretched tight over a frame that wasn't quite human. But it was the face that still haunts me, or rather, the lack of one. It had a head shaped vaguely like a deer's skull, hollow and elongated, with two faintly glowing points where eyes should be. No visible mouth that I could see from that distance. It stood perfectly still, watching us. Then it tilted its head with a sound like brittle branches breaking. No one said a word. We just ran. We crashed through the underbrush, all thoughts of following a path forgotten. I could hear Cody's panicked breathing ahead of me and Michelle's footsteps somewhere to my right. The thing made no sound as it pursued us, and it was pursuing us. Every time I glanced back, I caught glimpses of it moving between trees, keeping pace without seeming to hurry, its limbs bending at impossible angles as it navigated the forest. I lost sight of both Cody and Michelle. The woods all looked the same, endless trees and shadows. I had no idea if I was heading toward camp or deeper into the hollow. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but pure terror kept me moving. I broke through a thicket and found myself at the edge of a small stream. I paused, gasping for breath, and listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no crackling branches. The silence was almost worse than knowing where the thing was. I followed the stream, hoping it would lead to a trail or road. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the trees thinned, and I saw asphalt ahead. I'd somehow made it to the Blue Ridge Parkway, though I had no idea where along its length I was. I collapsed on the guardrail, shaking uncontrollably. My phone had no signal. I had no water left. All I could do was wait and hope a car would come by, or that Cody and Michelle would find their way here too. About an hour later, Michelle emerged from the woods about a quarter-mile down the road. When she saw me, she sprinted over and hugged me so hard it hurt. She was covered in scratches, her ponytail half undone, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "Did you see it?" she whispered. "After we got separated." I shook my head. "No." "You?" It followed me for a while. I could feel it behind me. Her voice cracked. "Lucas, that symbol in the cabin, I've seen it before in one of my dad's books about Appalachian folklore. It's a hunger mark. People used to carve it to ward off the—" "Don't," I interrupted. I couldn't bear to hear the word. Cody appeared almost at dusk, walking up the road rather than coming out of the forest. He'd apparently hit the parkway at a different point. His face was ashen, his usual energy completely gone. He had a deep cut on his forearm that he couldn't explain. "I don't remember getting it," he said flatly. "I don't remember much after we started running. We flagged down a trucker who let us use his phone to call for help. When the park rangers came, we told them we'd been spooked by an animal, maybe a bear, maybe a mountain lion. They asked if we wanted to retrieve our camping gear. All three of us refused. The official report listed an animal encounter as the reason for our rescue. We never mentioned what we really saw. Who would believe us? We didn't talk about it much, even among ourselves. We went to our separate colleges that fall. Cody dropped out after one semester. Michelle switched her major from forestry to computer science. I still have nightmares where I'm running through endless woods while something watches from just behind the trees. None of us ever went camping again. None of us ever returned to Red Hollow. I've spent years researching folklore, trying to make sense of what we encountered. I've convinced myself it was mass hysteria or some environmental toxin that caused hallucinations. Some kind of gas from the earth, maybe, explaining the metallic smell. That's what the rational part of my brain says. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night and the wind moves through the trees outside my window, I remember how that thing tilted its head, how it moved without seeming to move. how it followed us without making a sound. And I wonder if it's still there in Red Hollow, waiting for someone else to wander too far from the marked trails, to stumble upon that cabin with the hunger mark, to become another story that no one quite believes. I still have the photo I took of that symbol in the cabin. The film was mostly ruined, light leaks and strange shadows obscuring most of the images, but that one came out clear. I keep it locked in a drawer. I don't look at it anymore, because the last time I did, I swear I could smell that metallic scent again, right in my own home. And later that night, I heard branches breaking outside my window, though there was no wind. XG. I still can't sleep properly, and it's been 3 weeks since it happened. I keep the lights on in my room every night. My dog Stella sleeps on my bed now. Mom doesn't even argue about it anymore. I need to get this out, to tell someone what happened, because keeping it inside is making everything worse. I'm 15, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought the scariest thing in my life was going to be the biology project due on Monday. Now I know better. Now I know there are things out there that can sound like people you love, that can wear their faces, but aren't them at all. It was a Sunday. My parents both work at the hospital. Dad's a nurse and Mom's in administration. Dad had a day shift and Mom was working a double, which meant she wouldn't be home until around 9 p.m. I'd been home alone plenty of times before, so it wasn't a big deal. I had Stella with me, my 106-pound Rottweiler mix, who's basically a giant teddy bear most of the time. I'd spent most of the morning working on my biology project on the dining room table. Our house in Pinewood Valley isn't huge, but it's comfortable. 3 bedrooms, a basement where Dad keeps his workout stuff, and a big backyard for Stella. It's in one of those neighborhoods where all the houses look pretty similar, and everyone knows everyone else. Around 11:30, I was getting frustrated with my project. I'd messed up some of the labels on my cell diagram poster, and I was trying to figure out how to fix it without starting over. Stella was napping under the table, snoring like she always does. That's when I heard it. A scratching sound at the front door. Not like someone knocking, but like nails dragging across the wood. Stella's head shot up immediately, and she made this weird noise. Not quite a bark, more like a confused grunt. I went to the window next to the door and looked out, expecting to see maybe a neighbor's cat or something. There was nothing there, just our empty front porch and the quiet street beyond. It was a gray day, kind of misty, which made everything seem extra still. I shrugged it off and went back to my project. About 10 minutes later, the scratching came again, louder this time. Stella got up and walked to the door, her body tense in a way I'd never seen before. She wasn't wagging her tail or whining to go out. She was just staring at the door. I checked the window again. Still nothing. I even opened the door a crack, with Stella right beside me, and peeked out. The porch was empty, and there was no one in our front yard. Weird, I muttered, closing and locking the door. I decided to take a break from my project and make some lunch. As I was making a sandwich in the kitchen, I noticed Stella was acting strange. She kept pacing between the front door and the kitchen, her nails clicking on the hardwood floors. Every few minutes, she'd stop and stare at the door again. I tried to ignore it. I sat down to eat my sandwich and scrolled through TikTok on my phone. That's when Stella started growling. Not the playful growl she makes when we're playing tug-of-war. This was deep and threatening, coming from somewhere in her chest. "Stella, what's wrong, girl?" I asked, putting my phone down. She was facing the front door again, her hackles raised and her teeth slightly bared. Then I heard my mom's voice from outside. "Serena, can you open the door? My hands are full." My blood went cold. Mom wasn't supposed to be home until tonight. She hadn't texted or called to say she was coming home early. And Stella never growled at Mom. "Mom?" I called out, not moving from my chair. "Yes, honey, it's me. I forgot my key. Can you please open the door?" It sounded exactly like her, the same slight southern accent she still had from growing up in Georgia, the same way she always called me honey. But something felt wrong. Stella's growling got louder. She took a few steps toward the front door, then backed up, like she couldn't decide whether to approach it or run away. "Mom, I thought you were working until 9, I said, my voice shaking a little. There was a pause, too long of a pause. "They let me off early. Come on, Serena, open the door." My mom's voice sounded irritated now, which was normal enough. But Stella, I'd never seen her act this way. She was now backing toward me, still facing the door, her growl continuous and threatening. I grabbed my phone and called my mom. If she was outside the front door, her phone would ring in her purse or pocket. I didn't hear any ringing outside, but my call connected. "Hey, sweetie, everything okay?" My mom's voice came through the phone. She sounded like she was in a busy place. I could hear people talking in the background, phones ringing, hospital sounds. My entire body went numb. "Mom," I whispered into the phone, "are you at home right now?" "What? No, I'm at work. You know I'm here until 9. "Why?" I couldn't speak for a second, because the voice outside our front door spoke again. "Serena, who are you talking to? Open the door now." It still sounded like my mom, but different somehow, like someone doing a really good impression but getting the tone slightly wrong. And there was a strange echo to it, as if the voice was coming from somewhere deeper than just outside the door. "Mom," I said into the phone, my voice barely audible. "There's someone outside the door. They sound exactly like you. They're asking me to let them in." There was silence on the other end. Then my mom said, her voice deadly serious, "Serena, listen to me. Do not open that door. Is Stella with you?" "Yes," I whispered. "Good. Go to your room, take Stella, and lock the door. I'm leaving work right now. I'll be home in 20 minutes. Call 911 if anything happens." I ended the call and stood up slowly. The voice outside hadn't spoken again, but I could feel something, a presence, like the air around the front door had gotten heavier. Stella was still growling, but now she was looking toward the side of the house, our siding windows. I realized with horror that whatever was out there might try to get in another way. I grabbed Stella's collar and started to back toward the hallway that led to our bedrooms. That's when I heard a sound that made my knees go weak. The sliding glass door in our kitchen, it opened, just a little, just enough to make that distinctive sound of the seal breaking. Then it closed again. Stella jerked her head toward the kitchen, her growl turning into a snarl. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood frozen, my hand still on Stella's collar, as footsteps, light, careful footsteps, moved across our kitchen floor. Then my mom's voice again, but from inside the house now. "Serena, where are you, honey? I'm home early." I pulled Stella with me and ran down the hallway to my bedroom. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pushed my desk chair under the doorknob like I'd seen people do in movies. Stella positioned herself between me and the door, her growl now a constant rumble. The footsteps came down the hallway, slow and deliberate. They didn't sound like my mom's steps. My mom always wore flats or sneakers that made a soft padding sound. These footsteps were heavier, uneven, like whatever was making them wasn't used to walking. "Serena, why are you hiding from me? Don't you want to see what I brought you?" The voice was all wrong now. It still had my mom's pitch and accent, but the rhythm was off. like someone who knew what words to say but didn't understand how they should flow together. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door. I backed up until I hit my bed, then sat down, pulling Stella close to me. She was trembling now, but still growling, her eyes fixed on the door. I expected the doorknob to turn for whatever was out there to try to get in, but instead the footsteps moved away toward my parents' bedroom at the end of the hall. I called my mom again with shaking hands. "I'm 10 minutes away," she said as soon as she answered. "Is everything okay?" "Mom," I whispered, terrified that the thing in our house would hear me. "It's inside. It came in through the sliding door in the kitchen. I'm in my room with Stella. It went to your bedroom." "I'm calling the police," she said, and I could hear the fear in her voice now. "Stay where you are. Don't make a sound. I'll be there as soon as I can." After we hung up, I sat in silence, listening. I could hear movement in my parents' room. Drawers opening and closing, the closet door sliding, the creak of their bed. Whatever was in there was searching for something. Minutes passed like hours. Stella hadn't stopped growling, but she'd gotten quieter, like she knew we needed to be silent. I kept my eyes fixed on my bedroom door, terrified that at any moment the thing wearing my mom's voice would come back. Then I heard the front door open and my mom, my real mom, calling out, "Serena? Serena, where are you? The police are on their way." I was too scared to answer. What if it wasn't really her? What if the thing had gone back to the front of the house? But then Stella's demeanor changed. Her growling stopped, and her tail gave a tentative wag. She knew my mom's scent, her real presence. "Mom," I called out, my voice breaking. "I'm in my bedroom." I heard her running down the hallway, and then she was pounding on my door. "Serena, open up, it's me." I moved the chair and unlocked the door with trembling hands. My mom stood there, still in her hospital scrubs, her face pale with fear. She grabbed me and pulled me into a tight hug. "Are you okay? Did it touch you?" she asked, holding my face in her hands. "No, it went to your room," I said, pointing down the hall. "It's still in there, I think." My mom looked toward her bedroom, her body tensing. "We need to get out of here, now." As we turned to leave, we heard a thump from my parents' room, then the sound of the closet door sliding open wider. My mom froze. "The police won't be here for at least 5 minutes," she whispered. "We need to know what we're dealing with." Before I could stop her, she was moving down the hallway toward her bedroom, motioning for me to stay back. Stella followed her, her growl returning, but less certain now. I couldn't let them go alone. Despite my terror, I followed a few steps behind. My mom paused at her bedroom doorway. The room looked normal at first glance, bed made, everything in its place. But the closet door was open, and there was movement inside. "Hello?" my mom called out, her voice stronger than I expected. "Who's in there?" The movement in the closet stopped. For a long moment, there was complete silence. Then, slowly, something emerged from the closet. It looked like my mom, exactly like her, wearing the same hospital scrubs with the same short brown hair. But as it straightened up, it kept going. It grew taller than my mom, taller than anyone should be, until its head nearly touched the ceiling. Its limbs were too long, its fingers extending several inches beyond what was normal. And its face, while it had my mom's features, they were arranged all wrong, like someone had tried to make a mask but didn't quite understand how a human face should look. It smiled, revealing teeth that were too numerous and too sharp. "Serena," it said in my mom's voice, but distorted now, like it was being played at the wrong speed. "Don't you want to give your mother a hug?" My real mom grabbed my arm and pulled me backward. Stella lunged forward, barking and snarling, placing herself between us and the thing. The creature's head tilted at an impossible angle, nearly upside down, as it regarded Stella. Then it looked back at us. Its eyes, my mom's hazel eyes, but all wrong, focusing on me. "I just wanted to see you," it said, taking a step forward. Its movements were jerky, like a marionette being controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. "I've been watching you for so long." My mom pulled me toward the front door. "Run!" she screamed, and we did, with Stella right behind us. We burst out of the house and ran across the street to Mrs. Patterson's house, pounding on her door frantically. Mrs. Patterson, an older woman who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades, opened the door and took one look at our faces before pulling us inside. "What happened?" she asked, locking her door behind us. Between gasps for breath, my mom explained what we'd seen. Mrs. Patterson's face went white. "It's back," she whispered, more to herself than to us. "After all these years, it's back." She sat us down in her living room and made us tea with shaking hands. While we waited for the police, she told us that 20 years ago, something similar had happened to her. She'd heard her sister's voice calling to her from outside, her sister who had died in a car accident months earlier. Whatever it was, had tried to convince her to let it in, had spoken to her about things only her sister would know. "I never saw it," Mrs. Patterson said, "but I heard it changing, its voice getting all wrong, like it couldn't hold the impression for long." The police arrived at our house about 10 minutes later, 2 officers who looked uncomfortable even approaching our door. They went inside while we waited at Mrs. Patterson's. When they came back out 20 minutes later, they both looked shaken. One of them was as white as a sheet. They came over to Mrs. Patterson's to talk to us. The younger officer couldn't even speak. The older one, Officer Davis, told us they'd searched the entire house and found no one. "But," he added, his voice lowering, "we saw something. In your bedroom closet, ma'am." He nodded to my mom. It looked like my friend Mike, but Mike's been dead for 5 years." He went on to describe how this thing that looked like his dead friend had spoken to him, had asked him to come closer, its voice changing from his friend's to something deeper, more demonic. "It got tall," Officer Davis said, his hands shaking as he declined Mrs. Patterson's offer of tea. "Taller than any person should be, and then it just folded itself back into the closet. By the time we got our wits about us enough to open the closet door again, it was gone. We couldn't go back to our house that night. We stayed in a hotel, all 3 of us, Mom, me, and Stella, in one bed. Dad came as soon as his shift ended, and we told him everything. I don't think he fully believed us at first, but he believed the fear he saw in our eyes. We ended up staying with my aunt in the next town over for 2 weeks. Dad went back to check on the house every day, but there was never any sign of the thing. Eventually, we had to go back. We had lives, jobs, school, but things weren't the same. We had priests from 3 different religions come and bless the house. We installed security cameras in every room. We never leave anyone home alone anymore, and we never answer the door unless we're expecting someone. It's been 3 weeks, and we haven't seen or heard the thing again. But sometimes, late at night, I think I hear scratching at my window. Stella always hears it too. She lifts her head and stares at the window, a low growl building in her throat. Mrs. Patterson told us that the thing, whatever it is, has appeared in Pinewood Valley before. Always mimicking loved ones, always trying to get people to let it in or get close to it. No one knows what it wants or what would happen if it succeeded. All I know is that I check my mom's height every time she comes home now. I watch how she moves, listen to how she speaks, and I sleep with my lights on, my door locked, and Stella by my side, because deep down, I know the thing might come back. It might wear my mom's face again, or my dad's, or even my friend's. And next time, it might not give up so easily. I still get chills thinking about that first night. It's been 30 years now, but I remember it like it happened yesterday. My husband Barry and I had just moved into Ravenwood Manor 4 days prior. We were so excited about this house. It was everything we'd dreamed of. An old Victorian with gorgeous woodwork, stained glass windows, and enough space for our 2 kids to each have their own rooms. It was around 11 p.m., and we were exhausted from unpacking. The kids were finally settled in their new rooms, and Barry and I were unwinding in our bedroom, watching some late-night show. The TV cast this bluish glow across the room. We hadn't even installed proper curtains yet, just temporary blinds that let in strips of moonlight. I was half asleep when I first heard it. A small voice, barely audible over the TV. "Mama?" I sat up, blinking away my drowsiness. "Did you hear that?" I asked Barry. He looked at me, confused. "Hear what?" "I thought I heard one of the kids calling me." Barry shrugged. "Probably just getting used to the new house. You know how Megan gets with new places." I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right. Megan, our 6-year-old, had been having trouble adjusting. Maybe she'd woken up disoriented. Then it came again, louder this time. "Mama?" The voice was high-pitched, childlike, but somehow different from either of our children's voices. It had this hollow quality to it, like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. Barry heard it too this time. I could tell by the way his body tensed beside me. "That's weird," he muttered, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "I'll go check on them." While he was gone, I sat perfectly still, straining to hear anything else. Our bedroom was at the end of the upstairs hallway, with the kids' rooms further down. The house was old, and sound carried strangely sometimes. But this voice hadn't sounded muffled by walls or distance. It had sounded like it was right outside our door. Barry came back after a few minutes, looking puzzled. "They're both sound asleep. Ethan's sprawled out like a starfish, and Megan's clutching that stuffed rabbit. Neither of them has moved." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Positive." I even stood there for a minute watching them breathe. "They're out cold." I felt uneasy, but tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the TV, or something outside. Barry nodded, though I could tell he didn't believe it either. We settled back into bed, but I couldn't focus on the show anymore. Every few seconds, I'd glance toward our bedroom door, which Barry had left slightly ajar. That's when it happened again. "Mama!" The voice came louder, longer, desperately seeking a response. It was undeniably coming from the hallway, just outside our door. Before either of us could react, the door slowly swung open wider. Not violently or dramatically, just a slow, deliberate opening, as if pushed by a small hand. "Barry," I whispered, clutching his arm. "Barry, the door." "I see it," he whispered back, sitting up straighter. We both stared at the doorway. There was nothing there, just the dark hallway beyond. But something felt different about the air in the room. It felt heavier, charged somehow. Then I heard it, the soft pat-pat-pat of what sounded like small, bare feet on the hardwood floor. The footsteps were coming toward my side of the bed. The TV's glow illuminated the floor, but there was nothing visible making those sounds. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The footsteps stopped right next to me. Then, to my absolute horror, I felt the mattress depress beside my legs, as if something, had just climbed onto the bed and was sitting on top of my legs. It was cold. That's what I remember most vividly. Not like the natural coldness of a room, but a penetrating chill that seemed to seep through the blankets and into my bones. The weight wasn't heavy, maybe like a small child of 4 or 5, but it was undeniably there. "Oh my God, Barry," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It thinks I'm its mother." Barry's face had gone completely white in the TV's glow. Without warning, he started frantically waving his hands over my legs, shouting, "Get out of here! Get out!" The moment he did that, the weight lifted. The cold sensation vanished instantly, and we both heard those same small footsteps, faster now, retreating toward the door. We sat frozen for what felt like forever, staring at each other, neither of us wanting to speak first, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. Finally, Barry jumped up. "The kids," he said, and we both rushed to check on them. Ethan and Megan were exactly as Barry had described before, sound asleep, undisturbed. Ethan, our 8-year-old, was still sprawled across his bed, one leg hanging off the side. Megan was curled up tight with her stuffed rabbit. Neither showed any signs of having been awake. We spent the rest of that night with all the lights on, sitting in the living room downstairs. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? We'd both experienced something impossible, something we couldn't explain away. In the harsh light of morning, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe we'd both dozed off and had the same dream. Maybe it was just nerves from moving to a new place. The house was old. Maybe the shifting foundation had made the door swing open and the mattress dip. But deep down, we knew what we'd felt, what we'd heard. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, we'd hear that same voice calling Mama at random times, usually at night, but sometimes in broad daylight. We'd feel cold spots throughout the house, especially in the hallway outside our bedroom. The kids started noticing things too. Megan complained about someone touching her hair while she played in her room. Ethan said he'd seen a shadow kid standing at the foot of his bed one night. We considered moving, but we'd sunk everything we had into this house. And honestly, whatever was there didn't seem malicious. Just lost, seeking something. About a month after that first night, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I felt that familiar cold presence behind me. I didn't turn around. I was too afraid of what I might or might not see, but I felt a small tug on my apron, like a child trying to get my attention. "Hello," I said quietly, still facing the stove. "Are you looking for your mama?" The temperature dropped even further, and I felt what seemed like small arms wrapping around my legs in a hug. Then it was gone. Barry had his own experiences. The strangest one happened about 6 months in. He'd fallen asleep on the couch watching a football game. When he woke up, there was a slice of pie on the coffee table in front of him, a slice I hadn't cut for him, and someone had carefully draped a throw blanket over him. Both kids were at school that day, and I had been upstairs the whole time, working from home. We've lived with this presence for 30 years now. Some periods are more active than others. We've had paranormal investigators, psychics, and priests come through. They've all confirmed there's something here, but no one's been able to tell us exactly what it is or why it's attached itself to me as a mother figure. Our children are grown now, with families of their own. They don't visit as often as they might if we lived in a normal house. They both have memories of strange occurrences growing up, toys that would move on their own, a playmate that no one else could see, the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of their beds at night. Last week, our granddaughter came to stay overnight. She's 5, about the age we think our ghost child might be. In the morning, She asked me why I didn't tell her about the other little kid who lives here. When I asked her what she meant, she said, "The cold kid who wanted to play dolls with me last night. He said you're his other mama." That night, I felt the bed depress again, just like that first time. The cold weight settled on my legs, but instead of being terrified, I felt sad. 30 years, and this lost child is still here, still seeking comfort. "I'm not your mama," I whispered into the darkness, "but I'm here. I'm here as long as you need me." The weight pressed harder for a moment, almost like a hug, before disappearing again. Barry and I have made our peace with whatever shares our home. We don't understand it, can't explain it, and honestly, I don't think we ever will. All I know is that 30 years ago, something in this house claimed me as its mother, and in some strange way, I've become exactly that. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear that voice calling Mama from the hallway. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, I find myself answering. I've been debating with myself for months about whether to post this. Even typing this now, my hands are shaking a bit. My therapist suggested writing about it might help me process what happened, but I honestly don't know if I'll ever make sense of what I saw that night in July last year. I'm 18, and my family lives in this small house in Black Ridge, North Carolina, right at the edge of some really dense forest in the foothills. We've got a decent amount of land where we keep some animals, chickens, a few goats, and 2 cows. Nothing major, just enough to supplement our groceries and give us some fresh eggs and milk. July 2020 was weird for a lot of reasons beyond the obvious pandemic stuff. The weather was just off. I remember July 16th specifically because it was so freakishly cold that night, like seriously cold for summer in North Carolina. When I went outside around 10 p.m., I could actually see my breath. I remember checking my phone's weather app and it said 42 degrees, which made no sense at all. I had just finished some homework and realized I'd left my phone charger in my car. Our driveway is a bit of a walk from the house, maybe 50 yards or so, and it was pitch black out there. The only light came from our porch and the almost full moon overhead. I grabbed the small flashlight we keep by the door and headed out. The cold hit me immediately. It was the kind of cold that doesn't just sit on your skin, but somehow gets inside you. I zipped up my hoodie and jogged to my car, an old Honda Civic that's basically held together with duct tape and prayers at this point. I got my charger from the center console and was about to head back when I heard the goats. We keep our goats in this pen about 30 yards from the house, on the side nearest to the forest. They're usually pretty quiet at night, but suddenly they all started making these desperate, terrified, bleating sounds. Not just the normal noises they make, these were different. They sounded scared, really scared. At first, I thought maybe a coyote or something was prowling around. We've had problems with them before, and my dad taught me to always check it out because our animals are basically money to us. I went back to the house first and grabbed my AR rifle from the gun cabinet. My dad's big on home defense, and living out where we do, we've all been trained to use it. The goats were still making those desperate sounds as I approached their pen. My flashlight beam bounced around in the dark as I walked, and I felt weirdly aware of the forest line to my right. It was just this wall of absolute blackness beyond my light. When I got to the pen, all 6 goats were huddled together in the far corner of their shelter. They didn't even acknowledge me, which was strange because they usually come running when any of us approach, hoping for treats. I opened the gate and stepped in, checking around for any sign of a predator. I walked the perimeter of the pen, my rifle ready, sweeping my flashlight across the ground looking for tracks or signs of disturbance. Nothing seemed out of place, but the goats were still panicking. That's when I decided to check along the forest edge, just beyond their pen. The tree line was about 15 feet from the back of the goat pen. I stepped carefully, scanning with my flashlight, when something caught the beam about 20 yards into the trees. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like, you know when you see something so out of place that your mind just kind of stutters? That's what happened. There was this figure standing perfectly still between two large oak trees. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, but so unnaturally thin it seemed impossible it could stand. Its limbs were wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Too long, bent at angles that a normal joint wouldn't allow. Its skin was this sickly pale color, like paper that's been soaked and dried, stretched tight over what I guess was its skeleton. But its face, Jesus, its face. There wasn't one. It was just this smooth, blank space with these milky, empty eyes. No nose, no mouth that I could see. Just those eyes that somehow looked both blind and all-seeing at the same time. I completely froze. The freezing air around me suddenly felt even colder, like it was sucking the warmth right out of my body. My flashlight beam was shaking because my hand was trembling so bad, but I couldn't look away from those eyes. We just stared at each other. For how long, I don't know. Could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt wrong, stretched out like its limbs. I couldn't even blink. Finally, my survival instinct kicked in, and I started to raise my rifle. I swear to God, I only looked down for a split second to line up my sights, and when I looked back up, it was gone. Not like it had run away. There was no movement, no sound of branches breaking or leaves rustling. It was just there one moment, and then completely gone the next, like it had never existed. I backed away slowly, keeping my rifle pointed at where it had been. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I got back to the goat pen, made sure it was secure, and practically ran back to the house. I didn't tell my parents. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I just saw some kind of monster in the woods? They'd think I was losing it, so I just went to my room, trying to convince myself I was overtired, that my eyes had played tricks on me in the dark. Around 2 a.m., I was still wide awake, staring at my ceiling when I heard it. This sound coming from somewhere in the forest. A woman's scream, but wrong. Distorted somehow, like someone had recorded a scream and was playing it back through damaged speakers. It started high and then dropped to this low, gurgling sound that made my skin crawl. It was distant enough that I didn't think my parents heard it, but close enough that I knew it was real. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there with my rifle across my lap, staring out my window at the tree line until dawn finally broke. The next morning, I got up early and went outside before my parents woke up. The strange cold from the night before was gone, replaced by the normal July heat. I went straight to the goats to check on them. 5 were there, not 6. I searched the entire pen, thinking maybe one was hiding or had somehow gotten stuck somewhere. That's when I noticed the back gate was open. I know I'd closed it the night before. I checked twice. I followed some disturbed grass toward the tree line, my stomach already knotting up because somehow I knew what I was going to find. About 10 feet into the forest, I found our missing goat, or what was left of it. The body was there, completely intact, but its head was just gone, torn off. Not cut cleanly like with a tool, but literally ripped from its body. There was surprisingly little blood, almost like something had drained it. What still haunts me is that whatever did this had to be incredibly strong. Goats have thick necks. You can't just tear a goat's head off. It would take inhuman strength. I buried the goat deep in the woods and covered the grave with heavy rocks. I didn't want my parents to see it and get scared. I told them one of the goats must have escaped, and we spent that day searching the area, putting up missing signs and calling neighbors. But I knew we'd never find it, at least not all of it. After that night, things changed. I couldn't sleep properly anymore. Every night I would wake up around 3 a.m., feeling like something was watching me through my window. Sometimes I'd hear sounds from the forest, not quite animal, not quite human. Branches breaking under heavy weight. That distorted scream, always distant, but always there. I started researching online, trying to figure out what I'd seen. I came across descriptions of something called a Wendigo, a spirit from Native American mythology associated with winter, starvation, and cannibalism. The descriptions matched: unnaturally thin, distorted limbs, unnaturally white skin. Some accounts mentioned a featureless face with milky eyes. 3 weeks after my encounter, our neighbor's dog went missing. A big German shepherd that wasn't the type to wander off. They never found it. A month after that, a hiker disappeared on a trail about 5 miles from our house. The search teams found his backpack and one boot, but nothing else. I wanted to tell someone, the police, forest rangers, anyone. But what would I say? I had no proof, just a story that sounded like the ramblings of a scared teenager who'd watched too many horror movies. But I know what I saw. I know it's real, and I know it's still out there in those woods. Last week I was taking out the trash after dark and felt that same cold air descend, even though it was a warm night. I hurried back inside and locked the door. From my bedroom window, I could see the tree line clearly in the moonlight, and for just a moment I swear I saw something tall and impossibly thin step out from between the trees, those milky eyes somehow visible even at that distance, staring directly at my window. I've convinced my parents to let me install better security lights around the property. I told them it was because of the missing hiker, that I was worried about strangers in the area. They agreed, thankfully. The lights help a little, but not much, because I know lights won't stop this thing. Whatever it is, it's not afraid of us. If anything, we're just interesting to it, for now. I'm moving out for college next month, heading to a university in a big city far from here. I'm terrified of leaving my family behind, but I don't know what else to do. I can't tell them what's happening without sounding insane. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and swear I can hear something scratching lightly at my window, even though my room is on the 2nd floor. When I look, there's never anything there, but the feeling of being watched remains. What scares me most isn't just what I saw that night. It's knowing that thing is still out there, lurking at the edge of our property, watching our family, maybe even learning our routines, waiting. And I don't know what it's waiting for. I've started recording everything, keeping a log of strange sounds, temperature drops, anything unusual. Maybe someday I'll have enough to convince someone to investigate. Or maybe this thing will just eventually move on to another area, another family. But until then, every time the temperature drops unexpectedly, every time the goats get agitated for no apparent reason, every time I hear a branch snap in the woods behind our house, I know it's there, watching, waiting. And I can't shake the feeling that what happened to that goat was just a beginning, like it was sending me a message, showing me what it's capable of. I don't know why it showed itself to me that night. I don't know why it hasn't taken more than just one goat from us. But I do know one thing for certain. Whatever that creature is, it isn't natural, it isn't human, and it isn't going away. And those eyes, those milky, empty eyes, I see them every time I close my own.